The summer of 2023. Remember this time? It was the summer the planet began to burn with a fever. You could feel it not just in the scorching city air, melting asphalt and human patience. No. The real, deep-seated sickness revealed itself where we've always sought coolness and salvation. In the ocean. Picture the boundless blue expanse covering over 70% of our planet. This great thermoregulator, the cradle of life, for centuries absorbed excess heat, smoothing out climate extremes and making Earth habitable. It was always our shield, our buffer. But in the summer of 2023, the buffer broke. The ocean stopped saving us. It began to scream. This scream was silent, but it could be seen on monitor screens in thousands of climatology centers around the world. It looked like a graph, the graph of the average daily surface temperature of the world's oceans. And this graph was no longer a gentle curve. It had become a sheer wall, an almost vertical ascent that made even the most experienced oceanographers go gray. Records weren't being broken every month or every week. They were being broken every day. The water in the North Atlantic off the coast of Florida warmed to 38 degrees Celsius, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature of a hot bath. Coral reefs, those underwater megalopolises, began to bleach and die en masse, turning into ghostly white graveyards. Marine ecosystems, built over millions of years, were on the brink of collapse. A quiet panic gripped the world, a panic they tried to muffle with reassuring press releases and scientific terms. The system, that impersonal yet all-powerful conglomerate of government agencies, research institutions, and the media, immediately offered an explanation. The official version. It was neat, logical, and, at first glance, comprehensive. The official version stated that we were witnessing a perfect storm, the cumulative effect of three powerful factors. First, El Niño. They explained in detail that this is a natural climate cycle in the Pacific Ocean, linked to fluctuations in the temperature of the surface water layer. Every few years, warm waters shift eastward, releasing a gigantic amount of heat into the atmosphere and changing weather patterns worldwide. In 2023, another powerful El Niño cycle had just begun. This was the main culprit, named and presented to the public. Second, ongoing anthropogenic global warming. Decades of greenhouse gas emissions have created a thermal blanket that prevents the planet from cooling. The oceans, we were reminded, have absorbed over 90% of this excess heat. And now, scientists said, the cup had runneth over. The ocean could no longer absorb heat as efficiently, and it was beginning to accumulate in the surface layers. This was the long-term trend upon which the short-term peak of El Niño was superimposed. And third, the cherry on top, the eruption of the underwater volcano, Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai, in January of 2022. This colossal event spewed an unprecedented amount of water vapor into the stratosphere, about 150 million metric tons. And water vapor, as we know, is a potent greenhouse gas. This giant vapor lens, suspended in the upper atmosphere, was calculated to further heat the planet. So, the puzzle was complete. El Niño, plus accumulated anthropogenic heat, plus volcanic vapor. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, published dozens of articles and graphs showing how these three factors, combined, created the anomaly we were observing. The world's leading climatologists took to their podiums and confidently declared, yes, the situation is alarming. Yes, it is unprecedented. But it is explainable within existing models. The world breathed a sigh of relief. The monster had a name. And that name was climate crisis. It was a convenient, understandable, and most importantly, familiar threat. A threat created by us, and therefore, theoretically, manageable by us. But what if this neat picture was just a facade, carefully constructed to hide something far stranger and more terrifying? What if the explanation was only partially correct, and the main variable in this equation was deliberately ignored? And this is where it gets truly strange. Because at the very same time that Earth's oceans began to boil, another, no less dramatic event was unfolding in the depths of space. An event that official science preferred to view in complete isolation from earthly problems. I'm talking about the interstellar object designated 3I Atlas, the third recorded visitor in history from beyond our solar system. It was discovered on December 29, 2019, by the Atlas telescope system in Hawaii. At first, it was mistaken for an ordinary comet. But when astronomers began to calculate its orbit, they were in for a shock. The trajectory was not elliptical, like objects in our system, but distinctly hyperbolic. This meant one thing. 3I Atlas had come from far away, from the interstellar void, and after piercing our system, it would return to that void forever. It was a ghost, a wanderer. Initial observations showed nothing special. A faint, barely discernible object with no coma or tail, which was strange for a comet. It moved along its trajectory and was almost forgotten. But everything changed as it began to approach the sun. On September 9th, 2023, 3I Atlas passed its perihelion, the closest point in its orbit to the sun. It literally dove into the furnace of the solar corona, passing at a distance of just 0.396 astronomical units from our star. That's closer than the orbit of Mercury. And in that moment, something inexplicable happened. Instead of melting, vaporizing, or breaking apart under the monstrous heat and gravity, as the models predicted, the object survived. More than that, it changed. Data from space and ground-based telescopes after perihelion showed that its energy signature, its brightness and spectral characteristics, had increased hundreds of times over. It was as if it had charged up. The dim space rock had transformed into a fiercely glowing object, emitting streams of energy in an unknown spectrum. The official explanation was restrained. Unexpected outgassing. Sublimation of volatile substances under solar heating. But here too, the numbers didn't add up. Far more energy was being released than could be accounted for by any known chemical or physical phenomenon. Now let's superimpose the two timelines. The summer and early fall of 2023. On Earth, an unprecedented, nearly vertical spike in ocean temperature that climatologists struggled to explain as the sum of three factors. In space, the interstellar wanderer, 3I Atlas, passes through the solar flame, survives, and transforms into a powerful energy source. The peak of ocean heating and the peak of the object's anomalous activity after perihelion coincide. To the day, to the week. Correlation does not imply causation. This is the mantra of any scientist, any analyst. And it's true. But when two unprecedented events, one on Earth and one in space, occur in perfect, frightening synchronicity, to dismiss it as mere coincidence is to voluntarily close your eyes. What if the ocean heating was caused by more than just El Niño and greenhouse gases? What if the main factor wasn't below us, but above us? What if, after charging itself from the sun, this mysterious object began to discharge its excess energy? And the closest, most convenient target for that discharge was our planet. This hypothesis sounds wild. It sounds like science fiction. It contradicts everything we've been told, and it would be nothing more than empty speculation, if not for one detail. One small but critically important anomaly hidden deep in the publicly available data archives. A gap, a blind spot, the very place the system desperately didn't want us to look. To understand this anomaly, you need to imagine how we monitor the energy reaching Earth. We have a whole fleet of satellites in orbit whose primary mission is to measure what's called total solar irradiance, or TSI. This is essentially the power of sunlight reaching the upper layers of our atmosphere. Missions like SOURCE, TCTE, and TSIS-1 aboard the ISS continuously monitor the sun. Their data is the foundation of all climate models. They tell us how much energy our planet receives from its star. If 3I Atlas was truly emitting something toward Earth, these ultra-sensitive instruments should have registered it as an anomalous spike in incoming radiation. I began checking the public data archives from these satellites, day by day, week by week, covering the entire period of the anomalous ocean heating and the activity of 3I Atlas. I was looking for unexplained peaks, strange signatures, anything that deviated from the norm. And I found it. But it wasn't a peak. It was a void. During several critical periods, perfectly coinciding with the most intense phase of ocean heating in late August and September of 2023, the data from the TSIS-1 satellite was missing. In its place was a note: data removed for sensor recalibration due to possible impact from a solar proton event. I found the same thing, with minor variations, in the archives of 2 other independent missions. Gaps, blind spots, covered up with convenient technical explanations. But when I checked the solar activity data for those periods, I found no significant proton flares that would have required such a total and synchronous shutdown of sensors on multiple spacecraft. The silence wasn't accidental. It was artificial. It was a carefully constructed architecture of silence. They didn't just miss something important. It seems they saw it and decided we shouldn't. This is no longer a mistake. This is a cover-up. And the biggest question now is not what is heating our oceans, but what exactly did our satellites record in those few days before their data was erased forever? Let's dismantle the official version. Let's look at it not as a scientific report, but as a story. A story crafted to reassure, to give a simple explanation for a complex phenomenon, and most importantly, to keep the narrative under control. Any good story rests on 3 legs, like a sturdy stool. In our case, these were El Niño, anthropogenic warming, and the Hunga Tonga volcano. 3 powerful, scientifically backed arguments that, working together, were supposed to withstand any weight of critical analysis. But what happens if you start to rock that stool? What if you look closely at each of its legs and find that beneath the fresh coat of paint, there are deep cracks? That's exactly what we're going to do now. We will begin the systematic destruction of this convenient and comforting story, and you will see that it crumbles not from a powerful blow, but from the simple touch of facts that the system chose to ignore. Let's start with the prime suspect, El Niño. It was presented to us as a powerful but well-understood beast. Climatologists have been observing its cycles for decades, building complex computer models, learning to predict its arrival and consequences. The official position of NOAA and other meteorological agencies was ironclad. The El Niño that began in 2023 was particularly strong, and it bears the primary responsibility for the anomalous ocean heating. To understand where the lie is hidden, you need to dive into the mechanics of this phenomenon. Imagine the Pacific Ocean, this giant aquatic pendulum. In normal years, steady winds, the trade winds, blow along the equator from east to west. Like a giant hand, they push warm surface water towards the coasts of Indonesia and Australia. As a result, a huge reservoir of warm water forms in the Western Ocean, while off the coasts of South America, in Peru and Ecuador, cold, nutrient-rich deep water rises to the surface. This phenomenon is called upwelling, and it supports the world's richest fisheries. The boundary between the warm upper layer and the cold deep water is called the thermocline. Normally, it is tilted, deep in the west and shallow in the east. But during an El Niño, everything changes. The trade winds weaken or even reverse direction. The giant hand stops holding back the warm water, and it rushes back eastward across the entire ocean. This colossal tongue of warm water suppresses the cold upwelling off the coast of the Americas. The thermocline flattens, and an incredible amount of heat and moisture is released into the atmosphere. This is El Niño, a planetary heat sigh that changes the weather all over the globe. Sounds convincing, doesn't it? NOAA's models showed beautiful maps where the red, anomalously warm zones in the Pacific Ocean correlated with the global temperature rise. But the devil, as always, is in the details. The first crack in this theory is the speed. El Niño is an inertial, slow process. The accumulation of warm water, its movement across the ocean, and the subsequent release of heat into the atmosphere take many months, if not years. Previous powerful El Niños, for example, in 97-98 and in 2015-2016, developed gradually. The temperature graphs crawled upward, but they did so smoothly, predictably. What we saw in the summer of 2023 had nothing in common with this picture. This wasn't a sigh, it was an explosion. The temperature didn't crawl, it leaped. No model based on El Niño dynamics could reproduce such an almost vertical jump. This was the first, but far from the main, discrepancy. The second, and much more serious problem, is the geography of the anomaly. A classic El Niño is, first and foremost, a phenomenon of the equatorial Pacific. Yes, it has global consequences, so-called teleconnections, droughts in Australia, floods in Peru, changes in monsoons. But the epicenter, the source of the heat, is always there, in the Pacific Ocean. Now let's look at the map of temperature anomalies for the summer of 2023. Yes, the Pacific was warm, but the most insane, most shocking records were set thousands of kilometers away. The North Atlantic, the Mediterranean Sea, the sea off the coast of Japan. These regions were literally boiling, showing deviations from the norm of 4, 5, and in some places even 6 degrees Celsius. El Niño cannot explain this. The mechanisms of its influence on the Atlantic are known, but they are complex, indirect, and most importantly, delayed by several months. Here, we saw the Atlantic heating up simultaneously with the Pacific, and in some places even ahead of it. It was as if you lit a fireplace in one room, and the walls of another, distant room instantly became red hot. This violates the laws of physics, or more likely, it means there was more than one source of heat. And the main one was not in the Pacific Ocean at all. Official science bypassed this point with a deafening silence, simply lumping everything together under the label of a global phenomenon. But that wasn't an explanation. It was a capitulation to the facts. Now for the second leg, the Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai volcano. Its eruption in January of 2022 was truly apocalyptic. The explosion was heard thousands of kilometers away. The shock wave circled the globe several times, and, most uniquely, it ejected a colossal volume of water vapor into the stratosphere, to an altitude of over 50 kilometers, about 31 miles. NASA scientists calculated that this amount of water, 150 million metric tons, could increase the total mass of water in the stratosphere by 10%. Since water vapor is an effective greenhouse gas, the conclusion was drawn that this event would have an additional warming effect on the planet. And again, on paper, everything looks smooth. Another factor to add to the equation to justify the anomalous heating. But here too, upon closer inspection, the theory falls apart. A study conducted by the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, NASA GIS, which was most often cited in the press, was crystal clear in its conclusions. Yes, there would be a warming effect, but its scale and time frame were completely inconsistent with what we observed. According to their modeling, the volcano's influence should lead to an additional warming of about 0.035 degrees Celsius, 35 thousandths of a degree. That's a value on the verge of statistical error. We were talking about a jump of tenths of a degree in a few months. Moreover, the model showed that this effect would develop gradually over a period of 5 years after the eruption, reaching its peak around 2027. What happened in the summer of 2023 was an event of a different order. To compare it with the influence of the volcano is like explaining a forest fire caused by a napalm strike by pointing to an unextinguished cigarette. Yes, a cigarette can also start a fire, but the scale, speed, and intensity of the catastrophe point to a completely different source of energy. The volcano was a convenient scapegoat, another variable that allowed the models to get somewhere close to reality, but it was not the cause. It was just background noise, used to drown out the main, terrifying signal. And finally, the third and most fundamental leg, long-term anthropogenic global warming. And here, I want to be perfectly clear. I am not denying the fact of warming, nor its causes. The ocean has indeed been accumulating heat from our emissions for decades. It is a giant battery that has been slowly charging. This is the baseline, the foundation upon which events unfolded. But that is precisely why the official version collapses. All climate models that account for the anthropogenic factor are excellent at describing trends. They show a steady, accelerating, yet still smooth increase in temperature. Their strength lies in predicting long-term tendencies. Their weakness is their inability to predict sharp, step-like changes in the system. What happened in the summer of 2023 was not just an acceleration of a trend. It was a break in the trend. It was a phase transition. The system didn't just get warmer. It transitioned to a new, previously unobserved state. And the fact that not one of the hundreds of complex climate models worked on by the best minds on the planet could predict this jump even a month before it began is the most damning evidence of all. Evidence that these models are missing a key element. The equation is missing its most important variable. The models broke. They failed the ultimate test, predicting reality. And when your theory fails to make a prediction, you shouldn't double down on its correctness. You should start looking for what you missed. But the system did otherwise. It simply declared that reality turned out to be worse than forecasted, and continued to tell the old story. This is no longer science. This is dogma. So all three legs of the official version are cracked. El Niño explains neither the speed nor the geography of the heating. The Hunga Tonga volcano provides an effect that is too weak and too slow, and existing models of global warming are fundamentally incapable of describing such a sharp jump. The story doesn't add up. It's falling apart. And this brings us to the need to look for another source of information. If the official data, passed through filters of calibration, correction, and smoothing, doesn't provide an answer, maybe we should look at the raw, unprocessed streams. In search of such a source, I turn to a world far from the lofty circles of academia, the world of commercial shipping. Imagine thousands of container ships, tankers, and bulk carriers continuously plying the oceans. Each of them is, essentially, a floating weather station. For safe and efficient operation, it is vital for them to know the temperature of the water overboard. This data is constantly collected and transmitted. It doesn't have the precision of scientific buoys from the Argo system. Their sensors don't undergo regular laboratory verification. The scientific community considers it dirty. But it has one undeniable advantage. There is an incredible amount of it. It covers the ocean in a dense, constantly updated network, especially on busy trade routes like the North Atlantic. I gained access to one of these archives, a gigantic data set from the last 10 years, and I began to analyze the very region that raised the most questions, the North Atlantic. Official NOAA maps showed a large, blurry red patch here, anomalously warm water. But when I built a map based on raw shipping data with the highest possible resolution, the picture was completely different. It wasn't a patch. It was stripes. Narrow, elongated corridors of anomalously hot water stretching for hundreds of miles. They looked as if someone had run a giant, invisible soldering iron across the ocean's surface. These hot stripes did not coincide with any known ocean currents like the Gulf Stream. They had a strange, almost artificial geometry. And it was within these stripes that the temperature reached those shocking, record-breaking values. The official maps we all saw were the result of averaging and smoothing. In the process of this processing, the unique, strange structure of the anomaly simply disappeared, dissolved into the general mass, turning into a formless blob. They didn't forge the data. They just chose a method of processing it that hid the most important detail, the most inexplicable, the most frightening. They were looking at the ocean through an out-of-focus lens, because a clear image showed something that, according to their models, simply could not exist. The issue wasn't that their model was wrong. The issue was that they ignored the data that contradicted it. And that is no longer a mistake. That is a choice. Strange, inexplicable, hot stripes in the Atlantic. This was more than just a discrepancy in the data. It was a clue. A clue indicating that the source of the anomalous heating was not diffuse and global as we were told, but local, directional, and frighteningly precise. Imagine the difference. It's one thing to stand in a room where the temperature is gradually rising due to the heating being on. It's another thing to feel a thin, searing laser beam on your skin. The first is climate. The second is an impact. And everything we were seeing screamed of a targeted impact. But if something was affecting the ocean with such incredible energy, it must have left a trace, not only in the water. It should have been recorded by our guardians in orbit. Those same satellites that tirelessly monitor the flow of energy pouring from space onto the Earth. The investigation moved from the planet's surface to its last line of defense, the cold vacuum of low Earth orbit. And it was there, in the sterile, publicly accessible archives of scientific data, that I hoped to find the ghost. The ghost in the machine. Proof that something from the outside had touched us, and that the system had done everything to ensure we didn't notice. To understand where and how to look for this ghost, you first need to understand the machine itself. Our planet is enveloped in an invisible network of sensors. We measure everything, from gravitational fluctuations to fluxes of high-energy particles. But for our investigation, only one, most fundamental parameter was important: total solar irradiance, or TSI. Simply put, the total power of sunlight falling on 1 square meter in the upper atmosphere. This value, known as the solar constant, though it actually fluctuates slightly, is the main energy input into Earth's climate system. The slightest change in it can trigger ice ages or, conversely, eras of global warming. Monitoring it is like keeping a finger on the planet's pulse, and the gold standard, the most accurate and reliable instrument for this measurement today, is the TSIS-1 instrument, installed on the external platform of the International Space Station. Imagine the ISS, this outpost of humanity flying at an altitude of 400 kilometers, about 250 miles, at a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour, nearly 17,500 millimeters. People live and work on it. But for us, its uninhabited part is what matters. A complex truss with robotic arms and dozens of external modules. And among them, constantly pointed at the sun, is TSIS-1. It's not just one sensor. It's a highly complex suite of 2 instruments. The first, the Total Irradiance Monitor, or TIM, is the absolute champion of accuracy. It measures the total energy of the sun across all wavelengths. The second, the spectral irradiance monitor, or SIM, does something even more astonishing. It breaks down sunlight into a spectrum, like a prism, and measures the energy in each individual wavelength, from ultraviolet to infrared. The data from TSIS-1 is the holy grail of climatology. It's the starting point for all models. Any weather or climate prediction, at its core, relies on these numbers. The flow of this precious data is continuous. Every second, photons from the sun hit the TSIS-1 sensors. This information is converted into a digital signal transmitted through the TDRSS satellite relay network to Earth, to the Mission Control Center in Houston, and from there to the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics, LASP, in Colorado. There, the data undergoes primary processing, calibration, and finally is released to the public. The protocols for publishing this data are strict and transparent. They are the basis of trust in the scientific community. Delays happen, but they are rare and always thoroughly documented. The removal of already published data is an almost impossible event, comparable to tearing pages out of the planet's main chronicle. Armed with this knowledge, I entered the digital cathedral, the public data archive of LASP. The interface was simple and functional. I selected the instrument, TSIS-1 TIM. I set the time interval, from August 1st to September 30th, 2023, the period of the most furious, inexplicable heating of the oceans. I pressed the plot data button. For a few seconds, the server processed the request. I expected to see an almost flat line with tiny fluctuations reflecting activity on the sun. Instead, the screen showed me something else. The graph was there, but it was torn. Right in its center, spanning several days in late August and early September, was a gaping void, a clean, white gap. There was no data. I scrolled down the page to the tables with raw numerical values. Next to the dates I needed was a short, devastating phrase, written in dry technical language. Data points removed for recalibration following anomalous sensor readings potentially linked to solar proton event SPE-23 Delta. There it was, the ghost. Not just a 404 not found error, not just a technical glitch, but an official, documented admission that the data existed, and that it had been deleted. The official version, as with the ocean, was immediately offered. A solar proton event, or SPE. This is a powerful burst of high-energy protons during solar flares. When such a cloud of particles reaches Earth, it can cause serious damage to satellites, trigger radiation storms dangerous for astronauts, and, of course, blind sensitive sensors like TSIS-1. In such a case, the protocol states, the data may be deemed unreliable and removed, and the instrument itself requires recalibration to ensure it is functioning correctly. It all sounds logical and plausible. It's the perfect cover. It's scientific sounding. It speaks of precautionary measures. It inspires confidence. But just like last time, all it took was digging a little deeper for the entire construction to collapse. First, I went to another public archive, the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center. They are the ones who monitor solar activity in real time using the GEOES series of satellites. These satellites hang in geostationary orbit and continuously measure X-ray and proton fluxes. If an event SPE-23 Delta, powerful enough to disable sensors on the ISS, had indeed occurred during the specified period, then the GEOES graphs should have shown a colossal, monstrous spike. I downloaded the data for those very days, and what did I see? Nothing. A completely calm sun. The proton flux remained at background levels. No flares, no storms. No event SPE-23 Delta ever existed. It was a fictitious event, an alibi that couldn't withstand a basic fact check. This discovery was like a body blow. It's one thing to suspect a cover-up. It's another to hold direct proof of a lie. They didn't just hide the data. They lied about the reason. But why? What could the TSIS-1 sensors have recorded that required such an unprecedented cover-up operation? Here we enter the realm of reasoned speculation. Let's consider the removal mechanism itself. The protocol for data deletion is an extreme measure. Usually, if a sensor's readings are questionable, they aren't deleted. They are marked with a special quality flag. For example, potentially contaminated, out of range, possible artifact. This allows other researchers to see these anomalous values and decide whether to use them in their work. Science is built on complete transparency, even regarding errors and failures. The complete removal of data from an archive is an act of censorship. It's a decision that says, this data is not just wrong. It is dangerous. It must not exist in the public domain. This decision is not made at the level of an engineer monitoring the instrument. This decision is made at a very high administrative level. And it was made. But the story got even stranger. TSIS-1 was not the only guardian. There are other, older missions that continue to monitor the sun. For example, the Source satellite, launched back in 2003. Its instruments are not as precise as those on TSIS-1, but they work. I checked its archives, and I found the same thing. During the exact same period. A gap, with the exact same explanation about recalibration. Two independent instruments on two different spacecraft, separated by thousands of kilometers of space, required recalibration due to a fictional solar event at the same time. The probability of such a coincidence approaches zero. This no longer looked like a glitch. It was a coordinated, synchronized operation to blind our eyes in space. They didn't just close one window, they drew the shades on the entire house. And now, we can formulate a hypothesis. What if they found something and hid it from us? What if, for those few days, a stream of energy was pouring onto Earth, but not from the sun? Imagine that 3i Atlas, after passing through perihelion and charging up, began to discharge its excess energy. But this wasn't just a chaotic flash of light and heat. It was something else. What if it was a highly directed, coherent beam of energy? For example, in the microwave range. Our sensors, like TSIS-1, are calibrated to measure the broad, incoherent spectrum of the sun. They expect to see a certain pattern. If a powerful, monochromatic, coherent beam hit them, they would go haywire. Their readings would be so anomalous, so far beyond all conceivable limits, that the automatic verification system would flag them as a 100% instrument error. Out of range. Non-physical values. But it wouldn't have been an error. The sensors would have been working perfectly. They would have simply recorded something they were not prepared for. Something that, according to our understanding of the universe, should not exist. This explains everything. Both the anomalous readings and the decision to hide them. Because to admit that this data was correct would be to admit that Earth was subjected to an energy impact of an unknown nature and artificial origin. This is no longer a question of climatology. This is a question of national, or rather, planetary security. The silence wasn't accidental. It was the answer. The answer to what the satellites saw in those few missing days. They didn't delete the data to hide an energy flare. They deleted it to hide its nature. Because what the sensors saw wasn't just light. It was geometry. It was structure. It was a signal. Strange, inexplicable, hot stripes in the Atlantic. This was more than just a discrepancy in the data. It was a clue. A clue indicating that the source of the anomalous heating was not diffuse and global, as we were told, but local, directional, and frighteningly precise. Imagine the difference. It's one thing to stand in a room where the temperature is gradually rising due to the heating being on. It's another thing to feel a thin, searing laser beam on your skin. The first is climate. The second is an impact. And everything we were seeing screamed of a targeted impact. But if something was affecting the ocean with such incredible energy, it must have left a trace not only in the water. It should have been recorded by our guardians in orbit. Those same satellites that tirelessly monitor the flow of energy pouring from space onto the Earth. The investigation moved from the planet's surface to its last line of defense, the cold vacuum of low Earth orbit. And it was there, in the sterile, publicly accessible archives of scientific data, that I hoped to find the ghost. The ghost in the machine. Proof that something from the outside had touched us, and that the system had done everything to ensure we didn't notice. To understand where and how to look for this ghost, you first need to understand the machine itself. Our planet is enveloped in an invisible network of sensors. We measure everything, from gravitational fluctuations to fluxes of high-energy particles. But for our investigation, only one, most fundamental parameter was important: total solar irradiance, or TSI. Simply put, the total power of sunlight falling on 1 square meter in the upper atmosphere. This value, known as the solar constant, though it actually fluctuates slightly, is the main energy input into Earth's climate system. The slightest change in it can trigger ice ages or, conversely, eras of global warming. Monitoring it is like keeping a finger on the planet's pulse. And the gold standard, the most accurate and reliable instrument for this measurement today, is the TSIS-1 instrument, installed on the external platform of the International Space Station. Imagine the ISS, this outpost of humanity, flying at an altitude of 400 kilometers, about 250 miles, at a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour, nearly 7,500 millimeters. People live and work on it, but for us, its uninhabited part is what matters. A complex truss with robotic arms and dozens of external modules. And among them, constantly pointed at the sun, is TSIS-1. It's not just one sensor. It's a highly complex suite of 2 instruments. The first, the Total Irradiance Monitor, or TIME, is the absolute champion of accuracy. It measures the total energy of the sun across all wavelengths. The second, the Spectral Irradiance Monitor, or SIM, does something even more astonishing. It breaks down sunlight into a spectrum, like a prism, and measures the energy in each individual wavelength, from ultraviolet to infrared. The data from TSIS-1 is the holy grail of climatology. It's the starting point for all models. Any weather or climate prediction at its core relies on these numbers. The flow of this precious data is continuous. Every second, photons from the sun hit the TSIS-1 sensors. This information is converted into a digital signal transmitted through the TDRSS satellite relay network to Earth, to the Mission Control Center in Houston, and from there to the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics, LASP, in Colorado. There, the data undergoes primary processing, calibration, and finally is released to the public. The protocols for publishing this data are strict and transparent. They are the basis of trust in the scientific community. Delays happen, but they are rare and always thoroughly documented. The removal of already published data is an almost impossible event, comparable to tearing pages out of the planet's main chronicle. Armed with this knowledge, I entered the digital cathedral, the public data archive of LASP. The interface was simple and functional. I selected the instrument, TSIS-1 TIM. I set the time interval, from August 1st to September 30th, 2023. The period of the most furious, inexplicable heating of the oceans. I pressed the plot data button. For a few seconds, the server processed the request. I expected to see an almost flat line with tiny fluctuations reflecting activity on the sun. Instead, the screen showed me something else. The graph was there, but it was torn. Right in its center, spanning several days in late August and early September, was a gaping void, a clean, white gap. There was no data. I scrolled down the page to the tables with raw, numerical values. Next to the dates I needed was a short, devastating phrase, written in dry, technical language. Data points removed for recalibration following anomalous sensor readings potentially linked to solar proton event SPE 23 Delta. There it was. The ghost. Not just a 404 not found error. Not just a technical glitch, but an official, documented admission that the data existed, and that it had been deleted. The official version, as with the ocean, was immediately offered. A solar proton event, or SPE. This is a powerful burst of high-energy protons during solar flares. When such a cloud of particles reaches Earth, it can cause serious damage to satellites, trigger radiation storms dangerous for astronauts, and of course, blind, sensitive sensors like TSIS-1. In such a case, the protocol states, the data may be deemed unreliable and removed, and the instrument itself requires recalibration to ensure it is functioning correctly. It all sounds logical and plausible. It's the perfect cover. It's scientific sounding. It speaks of precautionary measures. It inspires confidence. But, just like last time, all it took was digging a little deeper for the entire construction to collapse. First, I went to another public archive, the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center. They are the ones who monitor solar activity in real time using the GOES series of satellites. These satellites hang in geostationary orbit and continuously measure X-ray and proton fluxes. If an event SPE 23 Delta, powerful enough to disable sensors on the ISS, had indeed occurred during the specified period, then the GOES graphs should have shown a colossal, monstrous spike. I downloaded the data for those very days, and what did I see? Nothing. A completely calm sun. The proton flux remained at background levels. No flares, no storms. No event SPE 23 Delta ever existed. It was a fictitious event. An alibi that couldn't withstand a basic fact check. This discovery was like a body blow. It's one thing to suspect a cover-up. It's another to hold direct proof of a lie. They didn't just hide the data. They lied about the reason. But why? What could the TSIS-1 sensors have recorded that required such an unprecedented cover-up operation? Here we enter the realm of reasoned speculation. Let's consider the removal mechanism itself. The protocol for data deletion is an extreme measure. Usually, if a sensor's readings are questionable, they aren't deleted. They are marked with a special quality flag. For example, potentially contaminated, out of range, possible artifact. This allows other researchers to see these anomalous values and decide whether to use them in their work. Science is built on complete transparency, even regarding errors and failures. The complete removal of data from an archive is an act of censorship. It's a decision that says, this data is not just wrong. It is dangerous. It must not exist in the public domain. This decision is not made at the level of an engineer monitoring the instrument. This decision is made at a very high administrative level. And it was made. But the story got even stranger. TSIS-1 was not the only guardian. There are other, older missions that continue to monitor the sun. For example, the SOURCE satellite, launched back in 2003. Its instruments are not as precise as those on TSIS-1, but they work. I checked its archives, and I found the same thing. During the exact same period, a gap, with the exact same explanation about recalibration. Two independent instruments on two different spacecraft, separated by thousands of kilometers of space, required recalibration due to a fictional solar event at the same time. The probability of such a coincidence approaches zero. This no longer looked like a glitch. It was a coordinated, synchronized operation to blind our eyes in space. They didn't just close one window. They drew the shades on the entire house. And now, we can formulate a hypothesis. What if they found something and hid it from us? What if, for those few days, a stream of energy was pouring onto Earth, but not from the sun? Imagine that three-eye atlas, after passing through perihelion and charging up, began to discharge its excess energy. But this wasn't just a chaotic flash of light and heat. It was something else. What if it was a highly directed, coherent beam of energy? For example, in the microwave range. Our sensors, like TSIS-1, are calibrated to measure the broad, incoherent spectrum of the sun. They expect to see a certain pattern. If a powerful, monochromatic, coherent beam hit them, they would go haywire. Their readings would be so anomalous, so far beyond all conceivable limits, that the automatic verification system would flag them as a 100% instrument error. Out of range. Non-physical values. But it wouldn't have been an error. The sensors would have been working perfectly. They would have simply recorded something they were not prepared for. Something that, according to our understanding of the universe, should not exist. This explains everything. Both the anomalous readings and the decision to hide them. Because to admit that this data was correct would be to admit that Earth was subjected to an energy impact of an unknown nature and artificial origin. This is no longer a question of climatology. This is a question of national, or rather, planetary security. The silence wasn't accidental. It was the answer. The answer to what the satellites saw in those few missing days. They didn't delete the data to hide an energy flare. They deleted it to hide its nature. Because what the sensors saw wasn't just light. It was geometry. It was structure. It was a signal. When the official channels go silent, when public archives become digital crypts with pages torn out, the investigation doesn't end. It changes its nature. It goes underground. It becomes an archaeology of rumors, a cryptography of hints, a hunt for information in the dark corners of the web where the system hasn't yet managed to impose its sterile order. I knew that the proof of NOAA and NASA's lie, the gaps in the data, covered up by a fictional solar event, was powerful, but circumstantial evidence. It showed there was a cover-up, but it didn't show what was being covered up. To find the answer, I needed to find someone who was looking in a different direction. Someone whose instruments weren't part of the global, centralized network that could be blinded by a single order from an administrative center. I needed a witness who didn't even realize what they had seen. I needed the voice of an oracle. And I found it not within the walls of prestigious universities or government observatories. I found it in the deafening silence of the Mojave Desert. To understand who these modern oracles are, you have to discard the image of gray-haired elders in temples. Today's seers are engineers, programmers, retired military analysts, and obsessed enthusiasts. They are people who build their own eyes and ears to look at the universe without intermediaries. This is a decentralized global network of independent observers. Amateur astronomers with their backyard telescopes, ham radio operators catching meteor echoes and satellite signals. This is citizen science in its purest, most anarchic form. The system treats them with condescending disdain. Their data is considered noisy, their equipment uncalibrated, their conclusions amateurish. But that is precisely their strength. They are not bound by protocols, grants, or career considerations. They are driven by pure curiosity. And most importantly, there are so many of them, and they are so scattered that silencing them all is impossible. If the official telescopes are a giant, powerful searchlight that can be easily switched off, then the amateurs are 1,000 small candles burning in the dark. And one of these candles was burning especially bright. My search led me to a private forum dedicated to real-time signal processing. In one of the threads, buried deep from casual view, there was a sluggish discussion about strange artifacts appearing in the microwave spectrum. One of the participants, under the username Cassandra, mentioned a series of short, unexplained bursts that his system had recorded in the late summer. He attributed them to possible interference from military satellites or a malfunction of his own equipment. But he uploaded the raw data, several terabytes of unprocessed information, and that was the thread I grabbed onto. After several weeks of cautious correspondence through encrypted channels, Cassandra agreed to a video call. The man was Dr. Eris Burns, a 70-year-old man with tired but incredibly lively eyes and a beard reminiscent of the old prophets. His story was that of many geniuses ahead of their time. In the 80s and 90s, he was a rising star in the SETI program, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But his ideas were too bold. He insisted that we were looking for the wrong thing in the wrong place. That instead of waiting for an understandable letter, we should be looking for the byproducts of alien technologies, energy leaks, engine trails, industrial noise. His projects were deemed unpromising and defunded. Disenchanted with the bureaucracy of big science, he left. He went into the desert. There, on a small patch of land, far from the radio frequency smog of civilization, he and a few other enthusiasts built what they jokingly called Project Eridanus. It was a homemade radio observatory. 3 old 30-meter satellite dishes bought for a pittance after a telecommunications company went bankrupt, hand-built amplifiers, and the heart of the system, a cluster of hundreds of decommissioned servers running on open-source software. Their goal was modest, and at the same time, grandiose. They weren't hunting for a specific signal. They were just listening. They were creating a continuous, multi-year archive of the universe's radio noise in a frequency range that large observatories often ignore, considering it cluttered with terrestrial interference. They were the archivists of cosmic silence, hoping one day to hear a whisper in it. Dr. Eris Burns told me that in late August of 2023, their system had indeed recorded an anomaly. It wasn't like a classic SETI signal, narrow-band, modulated, carrying information. No, this was something else. Raw, furious, primordial. A series of very short, only a few milliseconds in duration, but incredibly powerful bursts of broadband noise. They appeared in a strictly defined frequency window, around 22 gigahertz. This is a very interesting frequency. It's close to the resonance line of water vapor, and Earth's atmosphere is partially transparent to it. The bursts were so powerful that at first Burns and his team were certain it was interference. A passing military aircraft, a new Starlink satellite gone haywire, or even a faulty microwave in the security hut 10 kilometers, about 6 miles, away. They spent a week trying to find the source on Earth. They triangulated using their 3 antennas, and the result stunned them. The source was not on Earth, not even in orbit. It was in deep space. The direction from which the bursts were coming, with an accuracy of an arc minute, coincided with the ephemeris, the calculated position in the sky of one single object, the interstellar wanderer, 3I Atlas. Burns, being a true scientist, treated this as an incredible coincidence. He wasn't following the climatology news. He didn't know about the gaps in the TSIS-1 data. For him, it was just a beautiful but inexplicable astrophysical puzzle. Perhaps some unknown process in the comet's coma. He wrote a draft paper for a scientific journal, cautiously describing his find, and continued to listen to the sky. He was sitting on a gold mine and didn't know it. I asked him to send me everything he had. Not just the processed graphs, but the raw, Unprocessed data streams. A few hours later, I was downloading the most important file in human history. And when I opened it, I realized I hadn't just found the missing link. I had found the key that unlocked all the locks. The first thing I did was to overlay the timestamps of the bursts recorded by Burns onto the TSIS-1 data graph. They matched perfectly. The moment of each burst fell exactly within the period that had been cut from the official archives. This was more than a smoking gun. This was a high-resolution video recording of the crime. Now we knew what the satellites had seen just before they were blinded. They didn't see sunlight. They saw these microwave impacts. Sensors designed to measure soft, distributed heat received a concentrated energy discharge. No wonder their readings were called anomalous. It's like trying to measure the temperature of a candle flame with a body thermometer, then getting struck by lightning and being surprised the instrument broke. The cover-up was completely justified from the system's point of view. They saw something that didn't fit any model, and instead of admitting the model was wrong, they decided reality was wrong, and they erased it. But that was just the beginning. Burns's data allowed for something more. It allowed us to see the structure. I ran the sequence of bursts through spectral and temporal analysis programs, and what I discovered made my heart stop. The bursts were not random. There was mathematics in them. There was a rhythm. They came in groups. 3 short pulses, a pause lasting exactly 3.14 seconds, then another 3 pulses, then a pause again, and so on, over and over. Triplets of pulses, separated by a pause equal to the number pi to 2 decimal places. This could not be a natural phenomenon. The outgassing of a comet, the collision of asteroids, the pulsation of a magnetar. No known astrophysical process creates patterns with such artificial mathematical precision. This wasn't just energy. It was a signal, carrying one of the fundamental constants of the universe within it. It was less like a scream and more like the steady beat of a drum, or the work of some giant mechanism switching on and off in a strict, measured rhythm. The discovery by Eris Burns, made in the desert with equipment built from scrap metal, perfectly filled the gap left by the system. It explained why the official sensors went haywire. It explained why the data was hidden. And, most terrifyingly, it perfectly matched the picture of those hot stripes in the Atlantic. If you direct such a pulsed microwave beam at the surface of the water, it won't heat it evenly. It will create exactly these narrow, elongated zones of intense dielectric heating. The geometry of the anomaly on Earth was a direct reflection of the geometry of the signal from space. All the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. And here, the final, most disturbing discovery of this stage awaited me. Looking at the waterfall plots of the signals, I noticed something else. Within each of the triple pulses, there was its own finer structure. Barely perceptible frequency fluctuations. I zoomed in on one of the pulses, and I saw it. The pattern was complex, but it repeated. In every pulse, in every triplet. This wasn't just a signature. It was a fingerprint. A digital stamp embedded in the energy flow. And this fingerprint seemed vaguely familiar. I started to search my memory for old, half-forgotten projects, declassified documents, strange cases from the history of radio astronomy. And suddenly, it hit me. The WOW signal. The legendary signal captured by the Big Ear radio telescope on August 15th, 1977. 72 seconds of a powerful, narrow-band signal that has never been explained. Everyone remembers its intensity, but few know that it also had its own fine internal structure, which was only recently extracted from old records. And this structure, this fingerprint, was frighteningly similar to what I was seeing now. The triangle Chris had filmed was not just an anomaly. It was a signature. a signature that other observers had begun to find in old archived data. Aris Burns hadn't just recorded an anomalous burst from a comet. He had, without knowing it, caught an echo. An echo of an event that happened almost 50 years ago. This meant that 3I Atlas was not the only source. Whatever this is, it was already here. It had just started speaking again. And this time, its whisper had become a scream. When you hold a piece of the truth like this, proof of microwave bursts from 3I Atlas, their artificial structure, their perfect alignment with the gaps in official data, it's tempting to stop, to declare victory. Here it is, the culprit. An interstellar object heated our oceans. Mystery solved. But that would be a mistake. It would be like finding a shell casing at a crime scene and declaring the case closed without even trying to find the weapon, the shooter, and the motive. Aris Burns' discovery was not the end of the investigation, but its true beginning. It was the key that opened the door to a much darker and more convoluted room. Until this point, we were dealing with a single event, a single anomaly. Now, it was time to broaden our horizons. It was time to start connecting the dots. To build what you might call a conspiracy map, or, to be less provocative, a timeline of hidden correlations. I realized that the ocean heating and the microwave bursts were not an isolated phenomenon. They were the culmination, the loud final chord in a long, carefully orchestrated symphony of strangeness that had been playing out before our very eyes for several years. And to understand its meaning, you had to hear not only the loud notes, but also the quiet, barely perceptible transitions between them. You had to see not just the events, but the architecture behind them. The architecture of silence. The first step was to create a detailed minute-by-minute timeline. I took all the key events related to 3I Atlas and the ocean heating and placed them on a single graph. The discovery of the object in December 2019. Its perihelion on September 9th, 2023. The period of microwave bursts recorded by Burns. And of course the anomalous spike in ocean temperature. This central axis was our reference point. Now, I began to add other, seemingly completely unrelated events from the worlds of science, technology, and even geopolitics onto it. I sifted through news archives, press releases, technical reports, looking for any oddities that occurred during this 4-year period. And very soon, a frightening pattern began to emerge from the chaos of disparate facts. It was a choreography. Slow, deliberate, played out on a timeline too vast for us to notice at first. The first act of this drama began long before the ocean started to boil. It began in October of 2021. Remember that time. The world was just beginning to emerge from its pandemic slumber. Everyone's attention was on the economy and public health. And against this backdrop, a quiet, bureaucratic event went almost unnoticed. The International Academy of Astronautics, IAA, one of the most influential non-governmental organizations in the space sector, published an updated version of its protocols for post-detection of extraterrestrial intelligence. These protocols, often called the SETI protocols, are not law, but serve as a gentleman's agreement for scientists worldwide. They define what to do if we ever receive a confirmed signal. The old version, adopted back in the 80s, was crystal clear. In the event of a signal detection, the information must be made public immediately and as widely as possible. Transparency was the key principle. The knowledge belongs to all humanity. But the new version, adopted in October 2021, contained one tiny but fundamental change. A new clause, 7.3b, appeared. It stated that before a public announcement, a period of consultation with relevant national and international bodies should be undertaken to assess potential risks and consequences. In plain English, they introduced censorship. They created a legal mechanism to hide a discovery for an indefinite period under the pretext of national security. At the time, this change caused a small storm in the narrow circles of SETI enthusiasts, but was quickly forgotten. But now, on my timeline, it looked ominous. 2 years before 3I Atlas arrived at the sun, 2 years before the anomalous bursts, the system had already prepared a legal instrument to secure its right to silence. A coincidence or foresight? The second act played out in the heavens. Throughout 2022 and early 2023, a quiet but massive regrouping of our space assets was taking place. Officially, it was called Orbital Constellation Optimization. Several key Earth remote sensing satellites, belonging to both NASA and the European Space Agency, ESA, performed a series of strange orbital maneuvers, inexplicable from the perspective of their primary missions. For example, the Sentinel-1B satellite, one of Europe's main radar observers, suddenly failed in December 2021. The official reason? A power system anomaly. But analysis by independent observers showed that shortly before its death, the satellite had made several small but precise orbit corrections that changed its trajectory to pass over specific, sparsely populated areas of the Pacific Ocean and Antarctica. Why? No one could explain. Then, in the spring of 2023, several American meteorological satellites from the GOES series were temporarily placed in diagnostic mode, which created blind spots in coverage over the South Atlantic for several weeks. Officially, planned maintenance. But when I plotted these blind spots and altered orbits on a map, I saw that they perfectly coincided with the trajectory of 3I Atlas across the celestial sphere. They weren't just turning off the cameras, they were redirecting them. They were creating an observation corridor while simultaneously removing excess eyes from other areas. They were preparing for an encounter. They knew what they would need to look at and where. And they were doing everything to ensure that at the right moment, in the right place, only their instruments would be present. The third act was the most subtle and the most insidious. It didn't play out in space, but in the world of big data, in the digital bowels of our civilization. In May of 2023, just 3 months before the peak of the anomaly, an event occurred that was reported by every tech publication in the world, but no one understood its true significance. There was a major outage on the Amazon Web Services, AWS cloud platform, at their largest and most important data center, US East 1 in Northern Virginia. For several hours, hundreds of websites and services worldwide went down. The official reason? A network configuration error. Everyone quickly forgot about the incident, writing it off as the usual fragility of modern digital infrastructure. But I decided to dig deeper. I contacted an insider who worked for one of the companies affected by the outage, and he told me something incredible. The outage was not accidental. It was caused by anomalous activity directed at one very specific set of servers. The servers that stored and processed scientific data. Specifically, the archives of the Zwicky Transient Facility, ZTF project, a robotic sky survey that specializes in finding anomalous and rapidly changing objects, such as comets and asteroids. According to my source, in the hours before the outage, someone or something was attempting to download a colossal amount of data from these archives, petabytes of information related to observations of a specific patch of sky, the very patch where 3I Atlas was located at that moment. The AWS security system interpreted this as a massive attack and automatically blocked access, which led to a cascading failure. Someone was desperately trying to get all the raw data on 3I Atlas before it reached the sun. Someone who didn't want to rely on the official filtered reports. Someone who wanted to conduct their own independent analysis. Or even more likely, someone wanted to make sure there was nothing extra in that raw data before the main act began. The AWS outage was not just a coincidence, it was a cover story. a smokescreen for the digital heist of the century. And now, with all these dots plotted on the map, the overall picture becomes clear and terrifying. It was a multi-stage operation to establish information control. Stage 1, legal, change international protocols to gain the right to silence. Stage 2, hardware, reconfigure satellites to create an exclusive observation channel and remove unnecessary witnesses. Stage 3, information, acquire or destroy all raw data on the object before it revealed its true nature. And finally, Stage 4, execution. When the object activated, record its signal and then erase all public traces of that observation under the pretext of a technical failure. This was not a chain of accidents. This was a flawless, cold-blooded strategy. But who implemented it? And why? Here, the investigation takes another turn and runs into what could be called an artifact from the past. I recalled the story of Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor to fly through our system in 2017. I recalled all the strangeness associated with it, its cigar-like shape, its non-gravitational acceleration, its inexplicable brightness. And I remembered that after its flyby, something very similar to what we are seeing now happened in the world. A new international body was created. Quiet, little known, but wielding enormous power. The Planetary Defense Coordination Office, operating under the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOOSA. Officially, its task is to coordinate actions in the event of an asteroid threat. But in its charter, if you read it very carefully, there are several very vague clauses about coordinating responses to anomalous space phenomena of an unclear nature. This committee has no satellites or telescopes of its own, but it has the right to request data from all national space agencies. It has the right to make recommendations on the publication of this data. And its meetings are held behind closed doors. All threads led to one place, not to NASA, not to the White House, but to this quiet, little-known committee, whose protocols were recently rewritten. It seems it was the conductor who directed this entire orchestra of silence. It was the filter that stood between us and the shocking truth about what was happening in our solar system. They weren't just hiding information about 3i Atlas. They had been preparing for this event for years, starting from the moment Oumuamua flew by. They realized that more guests would come, and they created a mechanism to meet them in complete silence. Cui bono? Who benefits? This is a question as old as Rome itself, one that lies at the heart of any investigation. It is the blade that separates accident from intent, chaos from design. We have built a map of a conspiracy. We have seen a complex multi-year choreography, the changing of international protocols, the retargeting of satellites, the manipulation of data. We have even found the presumed conductor, a mysterious UN committee. But all of this remains just a collection of intriguing facts, devoid of meaning, until we answer the main question. Why? Why would the system, this impersonal but rational mechanism, go to such lengths to hide the arrival and activity of 3i Atlas? What is the motive? The official, reassuring version they would offer us, if backed into a corner, would sound noble and predictable to prevent global panic. Imagine the headlines. Unknown object of artificial origin attacks. Earth with energy beams. World markets would crash in seconds. Mass riots, religious extremism, and chaos would ensue. Governments would lose control. Civilization, built on the fragile foundations of trust and predictability, would crumble to dust. Therefore, they would say, we were forced to hide the truth. For the common good. To protect you from yourselves. This is a powerful, almost irresistible argument. It appeals to our own weakness, our fear of the unknown. It casts the system in the role of a wise but strict parent hiding matches from the children. But this version, for all its logic, does not stand up to scrutiny. It's too simple. It assumes that the system is a monolith, a single organism with a single purpose. But it is not. The system is a conglomerate of competing nations, corporations, and intelligence agencies, each pursuing its own interests. And in a world where information is power and technology is a weapon, hiding the truth about first contact will never be motivated by altruism. It will be motivated by greed, by the thirst for advantage. To understand the true motive, we must look into the darkest corridors of power and ask another, far more cynical question. What benefit can be gained from exclusive knowledge that an object demonstrating fundamentally new physical laws is nearby? The answer to this question opens an abyss. First, technological advantage. Imagine you are the only country or group of countries that knows about the existence of 3I Atlas and its properties. You know that it can absorb solar energy and convert it into coherent microwave pulses. The very existence of such a process is a revolution in physics. It's a Nobel Prize multiplied by 1,000. But that's in theory. And in practice, it's the key to creating weapons and technologies that seem like science fiction today. Energy sources with unimaginable density, communication systems that are impossible to intercept, and of course, directed energy weapons capable of boiling a patch of ocean from orbit or disabling the electronics of an entire continent. Whoever first understands and replicates the technology of 3I Atlas will become the undisputed master of the planet. The entire geopolitical balance, based on nuclear deterrence, would instantly collapse. A new god would emerge, and all others would pray to it. For such a prize, one would do anything. Lie. Conceal. Create a global smokescreen to quietly study, analyze, and attempt to copy an extraterrestrial artifact while the rest of the world argues about the climate. Preventing panic is just a convenient cover. The true goal is a technological leap, absolute supremacy. To be sure, this isn't just a paranoid fantasy. One only needs to look at history. Remember the Manhattan Project? When scientists realized the possibility of creating an atomic bomb, did they go out into the public square and tell the world so that together we could decide what to do with this terrifying power? No. They classified everything. They built secret cities in the desert. They lied to their families, their colleagues, their nation, not to prevent panic, but to gain a decisive advantage in World War II. And they got it. Remember the story of the object that crashed near Roswell in 1947. The official version changed several times. A flying saucer, then a weather balloon, then a secret project mogul. But whatever actually fell, the reaction of the system was telling. Immediate lockdown, total classification, a campaign of disinformation and ridicule of witnesses. Because even if it wasn't an alien craft, but merely an advanced Soviet or Nazi device, knowledge of its existence and technology was too valuable to share with anyone. History teaches us one thing. When technological superiority is at stake, morality and transparency are the first to be sent to the gallows. And the situation with 3I Atlas is Roswell on a planetary scale. The stakes are immeasurably higher, and therefore, the lie will be immeasurably deeper. Second, there is another, more subtle and frightening motive. Let's call it reality management. Imagine you know that contact is inevitable. You understand that you can't hide the presence of guests forever. Sooner or later, an event will occur that everyone will see. What do? You start to prepare the ground. You begin to slowly, very carefully, shape public consciousness so that at the moment of the great revelation, people's reactions are predictable and manageable. How do you do this? Through culture, through cinema, through literature, through video games. Look at how the image of the alien has changed in mass culture over the past decades. In the 50s, They were little green men, cartoonish invaders. Today, completely different images dominate. Mysterious, incomprehensible, often not even biological entities. Ancient architects who created life. Disembodied intelligences living in the oceans of Europa. Von Neumann machines traveling between the stars. The image of the alien has become more complex, more abstract, more acceptable. We are being slowly accustomed to the idea that contact will not necessarily be a meeting with humanoids on the White House lawn, that it might be strange, incomprehensible, and even frightening, but not necessarily hostile. This looks like a slow, global program of psychological acclimatization, and events like the flyby of Oumuamua or the activity of Three-Eye Atlas are used as part of this program. The system doses out information. It allows leaks. It allows people like Avi Loeb to publish bold hypotheses. It creates an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation. It doesn't deny the anomaly entirely, no. It places it in the quarantine of scientific debate. Thus, when the truth finally comes out, it will not be a shock. It will be a confirmation of what we have long suspected. There will be no panic. There will only be a collective. Ah, so that's what it was. We thought so. This is the highest form of control, not to hide the truth, but to manage its perception. And concealing the data about Three-Eye Atlas is a key element of this strategy. They didn't hide the fact of its existence, but its action. They left us with the image of a mysterious, passive comet. But they removed the image of an active, acting object capable of influencing our planet. Why? Because a passive observer is an intriguing mystery. An active agent is a threat, or at least a factor to be reckoned with. They want us to be ready for contact, but on their terms. For us to remain passive spectators in a theater for which they write the script. But there is a third, most disturbing possibility. What if the cover-up is motivated not by greed or a desire for control, but by fear? What if the system knows something about Three-Eye Atlas that forces it to act not from a position of strength, but from one of desperate weakness? Let's recall the structure of the signal that Eris Burns captured. Triplets of pulses separated by a pause equal to pi. This doesn't look like a message. It doesn't look like hello. It looks like the operation of a mechanism, a countdown, or a warning. In the dark forest theory proposed by author Cixin Liu, the universe is a dark forest full of hiding hunters. Every civilization is a hunter, and the primary law of survival is to remain silent, because anyone who reveals their presence will be immediately destroyed by other, stronger hunters, not out of malice, but out of simple fear. What if Three-Eye Atlas is not a ship or a probe? What if it's an automated guard dog left here by some ancient, ultra-powerful civilization? A beacon that reacts to certain levels of technological development. We started making too much noise in the radio spectrum. We went into space, and we activated it. And its microwave bursts were not an attack. They were a warning shot. I see you. Be quiet, or someone will come who will make you quiet forever. If this hypothesis is correct, then the actions of the system take on a completely different tragic meaning. They are hiding the truth not to gain an advantage. They are hiding it because they are terrified. They have realized that humanity, like a careless child, has wandered into a tiger's cage and is trying to pull its whiskers. And now, they are frantically trying to pretend that nothing has happened. They are trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Hence the feverish attempts to rewrite the SETI protocols, to silence everyone. Hence the desire to hide the very fact that we were impacted. Because to admit, it is to admit that we have been noticed. And to be noticed in the dark forest is a death sentence. They were hiding the truth not to protect us from panic. They were hiding it to buy time. Time to prepare a response they will never tell us about. Time to figure out how to disarm this cosmic mine we have stepped on. Or, even more frighteningly, time to prepare bunkers for the chosen few, while the rest of humanity is sacrificed to appease the unseen hunters. In this scenario, the cover-up is not an act of aggression. It is an act of desperation. We have established the fact of a cover-up. We have analyzed the possible motives. Now it is time to return to the source, to the main character of this drama, who until now has been merely a point of light in astronomical images, a silent object of our speculation. It is time for a detailed, almost pathological anatomical dissection of 3I Atlas itself. Based on all the evidence we have gathered, official but filtered data, testimonies from independent observers, and the frightening gaps in the archives, we can attempt to reconstruct its true nature. We must remove its comet mask and look underneath to see what is really hiding there. And I warn you, what we will find there is incompatible with any known natural phenomenon. The anatomy of this object screams that it was engineered. It was built. It is a machine. Let's start with the most fundamental aspect, its trajectory. Official science classified it as hyperbolic. This means its velocity was so great that the sun's gravity could not capture it into an elliptical orbit. It came from interstellar space and will return there forever. This alone makes it a rare visitor. But the devil, as always, is in the details. When astronomers from the Galileo project, led by Avi Loeb, performed a reverse analysis of its trajectory, that is, tried to calculate where exactly it came from, they encountered a paradox. Its path did not point to any of the nearby stars. It seemed to have emerged from a patch of absolute deep void, where there is nothing that could have shot it in our direction at such a speed. This is the first oddity, a ghost object born from nothing. But the most interesting part began as it approached the solar system. Observations made with the Hubble Space Telescope when the object was still far away showed that it exhibited a weak but distinct non-gravitational acceleration. Simply put, some additional force, besides the sun's gravity, was acting on it, giving it a slight push. The official explanation was standard for such cases: outgassing. That is, sunlight heats the comet's surface, ice sublimates into gas, and these escaping jets of gas act like tiny rocket engines, altering the trajectory. This phenomenon is well studied and observed in many comets. But in the case of 3I Atlas, it didn't work. First, telescopes, including the powerful James Webb, detected no coma or tail around the object, the very clouds of gas and dust that should have inevitably accompanied the outgassing process. The object was frighteningly clean, sharp, like a shard of glass. Second, the acceleration was too smooth. Gas jets on a comet erupt chaotically as the sun illuminates different parts of its rotating nucleus. This creates a jerky, uneven acceleration. The acceleration of 3I Atlas, however, was smooth, constant, as if an engine was running on very low thrust. This was the same anomalous behavior previously demonstrated by Oumuamua. And this is no longer a coincidence. It's a pattern. 2 consecutive interstellar visitors behave like objects equipped with some kind of propulsion system. Perhaps it was a solar sail, using light pressure for acceleration. This hypothesis was popular in the case of Oumuamua, but 3I Atlas was too massive and not bright enough for light pressure to have such an effect on it. No, this was something else. Some form of reactionless drive that our physics can only dream of for now. Now let's move on to its physical properties. What was it? A rock? An ice ball? Spectral analysis conducted in the early stages when the object was still far away yielded very strange, contradictory results. Its reflected light showed lines indicating the presence of silicates, like a common asteroid. But there were also broad absorption bands characteristic of complex organic molecules, such as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, And, most astonishingly, faint but clear traces of metals that shouldn't be there were detected. Rhenium and osmium. These are some of the densest and most refractory elements in the periodic table. They are extremely rare in the universe and are formed only in supernova explosions. Finding them in a random interstellar rock is like finding a vein of pure californium in a piece of granite. This was not just a rock. It was a composite material, a mixture of natural and industrial components. But the biggest shock awaited scientists when 3I Atlas passed perihelion. It plunged into the solar corona, where temperatures reach millions of degrees. Any known comet, any asteroid would have simply vaporized, turning into a cloud of plasma. Models predicted its complete destruction. But it survived. It emerged from the fiery hell not just intact, but changed. After perihelion, its brightness increased hundreds of times. It began to glow. The official explanation: massive sublimation of material from the surface, already seemed ridiculous. To produce such a glow, the object would have had to lose hundreds of tons of material per second. It would have simply disappeared in a few days. But it didn't disappear. Its size, according to estimates, remained the same. This meant that the glow was not chemical in nature, but something else. It wasn't burning. It was radiating. It was as if you had thrown a piece of special ceramic alloy into a blast furnace. It wouldn't melt. It would glow white-hot, absorb the thermal energy, and then, as it cooled, slowly release it. It seems 3I Atlas did the same, but on a completely different, unimaginable technological level for us. Its surface was not just refractory, it was active. It was some kind of giant thermoelectric converter, a plasma shield or an energy accumulator that absorbed the sun's fury, stored it, and began to use it for its own purposes. And this brings us to the most important part: its action. Those microwave bursts that Eris Burns captured. Now, knowing that the object charged up from the sun, we can understand where the energy for these pulses came from. It was simply discharging the excess. But how did it do it? And why? Let's look at the signal structure again. Triplets of pulses, mathematical precision, an embedded signature, repeating the wow signal. This is not a byproduct of an engine. It's not a random energy dump. It is a targeted transmission. But what was it transmitting? Information or just energy? Let's consider the second, more disturbing hypothesis. What if this wasn't communication, but work? What if 3I Atlas is not a reconnaissance probe, but a worker drone? Some part of a giant, incomprehensible galactic mechanism. And its task was, what? To perform some action on our planet. Remember the hot stripes in the Atlantic? We assume they were the result of dielectric heating of water by a microwave beam. This is similar to how a microwave oven works. It uses microwaves of a specific frequency to make water molecules vibrate and heat up. What if 3I Atlas is a giant microwave oven and Earth is the dish it's cooking? But why? Why would anyone need to heat specific parts of our ocean? The answer might be even stranger than the question itself. What if the goal wasn't to heat the water, but to activate something within it? In recent years, oceanographers have increasingly spoken of a so-called shadow biosphere, hypothetical life forms that use a completely different biochemistry than we do. For example, giant viruses discovered in the deep ocean whose genomes contain thousands of genes of unknown origin. What if there are microorganisms, or even nanomachines on Earth, in a dormant state, left here millions of years ago? And to activate them, an external trigger is needed, a special energy signal of a specific frequency and structure. Perhaps 3I Atlas was just the ignition key. It flew in, illuminated the necessary parts of the ocean, triggered some ancient dormant process, and flew on to the next point on its route. We were just one stop on its schedule. This thought is terrifying in its impersonality. We were not the target of an attack. We were just an element of a technological process. And the ocean heating and subsequent climate chaos are just a side effect, like smoke from a factory chimney. And now, all these disparate anatomical details, the strange trajectory, the non-gravitational acceleration, the composite material, the ability to survive in the sun's corona and generate structured microwave pulses, come together into a single, consistent but utterly alien image. This is not a comet. This is not an asteroid. It is an autonomous, multi-purpose interstellar machine. Perhaps a Bracewell probe, a hypothetical robotic device that travels from star to star, carrying out some program and using the energy of stars to recharge and move. Its purpose could be anything, from simple data collection to terraforming or, as in our case, activating some hidden mechanisms. But the strangest thing was not its composition. It was where it was heading after its maneuver near the sun. After it fired at Earth, its trajectory changed. It performed a barely perceptible but precise gravitational maneuver using Jupiter. And its new course was not away from the system, as it should have been. No. Its trajectory led towards us. Not to Earth itself, no, but to the L1 Lagrange point of the Earth-Sun system. This is one of 5 points in space where the gravitational pull of the Earth and the Sun balance each other out, allowing an object to hang there almost motionless relative to Earth. It's the perfect observation post. It wasn't leaving. It was taking up a position. It completed its task, and now it waits. It observes, perhaps waiting for the results of its impact, or waiting for its next command. It hangs there, 1,000,000 miles from us, invisible to most telescopes, silent, patient. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying detail in this whole story. The ghost didn't just fly by. It has remained in our house. At this moment, when all the threads have woven themselves into a single, tight knot. When the image of an artificial interstellar probe that first processed our planet and then took up an observation post seems to be the only possible explanation. When paranoia becomes another name for logic. It is at this very moment that it is critically important to take a step back, to stop, and to swing the pendulum back in the opposite direction with all our might. Any convincing theory, especially one that borders on madness, must pass the most rigorous test, the test of skepticism. We must, for a time, forget about cover-ups and conspiracies. We must become our own most ruthless critics. We must give the floor to the other side, the world of official, rational, boring science. We must honestly and thoroughly consider all the counter-arguments, all the alternative, natural explanations for each of the anomalies we have discovered. We must acknowledge the weaknesses of our own theory, because only by passing through the purifying fire of doubt can the truth, if it is there, be tempered and become steel. And if our theory is merely a figment of the imagination, it will burn in that fire, leaving behind only a handful of ash from misinterpreted facts. Let's start from the very beginning, with the anomalous heating of the ocean. We claim that neither El Niño nor other factors could explain its speed and geography. But is that really the case? A skeptic, a real climatologist from NOAA or the Max Planck Institute, after listening to us, would smile patiently and say, "You're making a classic amateur mistake. You're looking for one simple cause for a complex, non-linear process." He would explain that the Earth's climate system is not a clockwork mechanism, where each gear is responsible for its own movement. It's a boiling cauldron where thousands of interacting factors create a chaotic but internally deterministic system. What we call a model is just a crude approximation of this infinitely complex reality. The models did not indeed predict the jump of 2023. But this does not prove the existence of an external factor. It only proves that our models are imperfect. Perhaps we underestimated some of the internal feedback mechanisms. For example, the melting of Arctic sea ice. In recent years, the rate of this melting has surpassed all forecasts. The vast areas of dark water, uncovered from beneath the ice, absorb much more solar energy than the reflective ice. This additional heating of the Arctic waters could have triggered a cascade of unpredictable consequences. Changes in the trajectory of the jet streams, blocking anticyclones, which led to the anomalous heat in the North Atlantic. This is a complex but completely natural mechanism. And what about those hot stripes we found in the shipping data? An interesting observation, our skeptic would say, but most likely just a data artifact. He would point out that ships' sensors are imprecise, that they measure the temperature of water passing through the engine's cooling system, which can be several degrees warmer than the surrounding water. And the elongated shape of the stripes is easily explained by the fact that they are simply the tracks of the busiest sea lanes where the most ships pass, and consequently, the most dirty data is collected. No soldering iron from space, just peculiarities of data collection. Now let's move on to 3I Atlas and its strange behavior. Non-gravitational acceleration with no visible coma? That is indeed a puzzle, our scientist would admit, but it has several plausible natural explanations. Perhaps the object is made of solid hydrogen. This exotic hypothesis suggests that icebergs of frozen hydrogen could form in cold interstellar clouds. Such an object would be practically invisible, and as it approached the sun, it would vaporize, creating thrust, but the cloud of hydrogen would be transparent and invisible to telescopes. Or perhaps it was a dark comet, an object whose surface is covered with a thick crust of organic dust that prevents volatile substances from vaporizing, except through a few small cracks. Gas would escape from these cracks, creating acceleration, but there would be too little of it to form a visible coma. And surviving in the sun's corona? That is indeed impressive, the skeptic would agree, but not impossible. We know little about the strength of materials formed in the interstellar medium. Perhaps the object had an extremely high density and was composed of an iron-nickel alloy, like a planet's core. Such an object could withstand short-term heating, losing only a part of its mass. And the burst of brightness after perihelion? That's easily explained by the heat finally fracturing its surface, exposing fresh, more volatile layers, which led to a brief but powerful flash of outgassing. Everything is strange. Everything is on the edge of our understanding. But nothing violates the laws of physics. And what about the most damning piece of evidence? The microwave bursts captured by Eris burns and their artificial structure? Here, our skeptic would become particularly stern. You are relying on data obtained with homemade, uncalibrated equipment by a single observer, he would say. In science, this is called an irreproducible result, and it has no value until it is confirmed by independent sources. He would suggest that Burns fell victim to so-called peritons, short radio signals of terrestrial origin that have long misled radio astronomers. The most famous case occurred at the Parkes Observatory in Australia, where scientists spent years catching mysterious signals until they discovered their source was a microwave oven in the kitchen, which staff were opening before the heating cycle had finished. Perhaps Burns's bursts are also the result of some nearby industrial or military equipment, and the mathematical structure of the signal, the number pi in the pauses between pulses. This is a classic example of apophenia, the scientist would explain. A cognitive bias that makes us see patterns in random noise. Our brain is programmed to find patterns. If you stare at the static on an old TV screen long enough, you will start to see faces and figures. Burns wanted to find a signal, and he found it in random fluctuations. His result would not pass any serious scientific peer review. And finally, the gaps in the TSIS-1 data, the cover-up, the lie, the fictitious solar event. Doesn't that prove a conspiracy? It proves one, our skeptic would chuckle, but not the one you're thinking of. He would offer a much more mundane, bureaucratic explanation. Imagine the situation. The TSIS-1 sensor is indeed hit by some anomaly. It doesn't matter what it is. An electronics failure, a micrometeoroid impact, an unknown radio frequency pulse. The system outputs nonsensical, non-physical values. The engineer responsible for the instrument sees this. What does he do? According to protocol, he must conduct a full diagnostic, write a detailed report, convene a committee to investigate the cause. This will take weeks, if not months. And in the meantime, flawed, unreliable data will be sitting in the public archive, which will cause a wave of criticism against NASA and undermine confidence in the mission. So he chooses the easier path. He uses a standard, pre-approved phrase about a solar proton event, which doesn't require a lengthy investigation, and simply removes the questionable data segment. This is not a malicious conspiracy. This is ordinary bureaucracy, laziness, a desire to avoid extra work, and to cover one's own back. It happens in every large organization, every day. They didn't lie to hide the truth about aliens. They lied to avoid paperwork. And that, you must agree, is a much more plausible explanation of human behavior. So we have honestly considered all the counter-arguments, and they are strong. Each of our anomalies can be explained, albeit with some stretches, by natural causes or human factors. Our grand conspiracy theory crumbles under the weight of Occam's razor, which states that the simplest explanation is most likely the correct one. A chain of incredible but natural coincidences is a much simpler explanation than a coordinated interplanetary conspiracy. It would seem simple. An ordinary comet. Unusual coincidences. Case closed. Time to move on. But there was something else. One detail that none of the skeptics could explain. One small but irrefutable piece of evidence that, once again, with deafening force, swung the pendulum back in our direction. I said that the signal captured by Burns was not confirmed by other observatories. And that's true. None of the major radio observatories working on the SETI program saw anything. But why? The answer turned out to be ridiculously simple. They weren't looking. The standard SETI protocol dictates that they ignore any signals originating from the ecliptic plane. That is, the plane in which the planets of our solar system orbit. This region is considered too noisy with signals from our own satellites, probes, and planetary radars. All their filters are set to reject anything coming from within our own solar system. And 3i Atlas, like any object flying by, was moving precisely in this plane. They were methodologically blind to it. But there was one project that worked differently. The Breakthrough Listen project, funded by a private investor. They had one experimental program where they periodically listened to strange objects within the solar system, including Oumuamua. I contacted a junior researcher on this project, and after much persuasion, he, on condition of complete anonymity, agreed to check their internal, as yet unpublished archives for the period I needed. 2 days later, he sent me a short message. You were right. We saw it. The signal is weaker than your sources at the limit of detection, but the structure is the same, triplets of pulses, and the pause, 3.15 seconds. Management knows. They're preparing a publication, but for some reason, it keeps getting delayed. The confirmation of the signal by Breakthrough Listen was not just another clue. It was a phase transition. The moment when speculation solidifies into theory, and theory begins to take on the frightening shape of reality. Until this point, our entire construction, for all its internal logic, remained vulnerable to criticism. Now, we had independent confirmation, obtained on world-class equipment, of the key element, the artificial microwave signal from 3I Atlas. A bureaucratic error, an engineer's laziness, a malfunctioning microwave in the desert, all these convenient, rational explanations crumbled to dust. The pendulum swung back with such force that it seemed ready to fly off its axis. But where was it leading us now? If the signal is real, if the impact on the ocean is real, then we can no longer view this as an isolated astronomical puzzle. We are obligated to place it in a broader context, in the context of our own rapidly changing technological landscape. Because the most disturbing part of this story is not that they possess incredible technologies. It's that we ourselves, right now, are beginning to create technologies that make such events not only possible, but in a sense, inevitable. The line between science fiction and engineering reality is blurring before our very eyes. And to understand the true scale of what is happening, we must take a tour of the cutting edge of human genius, to the place where we ourselves are learning to be gods, unaware that there may already be other, more ancient and experienced deities in this universe. Let's start with the most obvious parallel: directed energy technology. The idea of transmitting power over a distance without wires, Nikola Tesla's dream, remained on the fringes of science for a long time. But in the last decade, there has been a quiet breakthrough. Projects like space-based solar power are being actively developed in the US, China, and Japan. The concept is simple and ingenious. Giant satellites with solar panels several square kilometers in area are placed in geostationary orbit. They collect solar energy 24 hours a day without atmospheric losses. This energy is then converted into a highly focused microwave beam and transmitted to Earth, where it is captured by a special receiving station, a rectenna. This is no longer theory. In June of 2023, at the very same time our oceans were boiling, the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory conducted a successful experiment called PRAM, Photovoltaic Radio Frequency Antenna Module, aboard the X-37B unmanned spaceplane. They were able to transmit a small beam of energy from orbit and power sensors on the ground with it. It was a tiny, almost symbolic step, but it proved the concept was viable. Now let's scale this technology up. What if, instead of a small experimental module, you have an object the size of a small asteroid in orbit? What if its surface is not just a solar panel, but a hyper-efficient collector capable of absorbing energy directly from the solar corona? And what if, instead of directing the beam at a special receiving station, you direct it right at the ocean surface? You get exactly what we observed: global climate chaos caused by the side effect of a power plant's operation. We look at 3I Atlas as a miracle, as a manifestation of an incomprehensible alien intelligence. But what if, for its creators, it's just a power station, a routine, utilitarian technology? This brings us to a frightening question. If we can do this, albeit in miniature for now, why can't they? Moreover, what if the technology we consider our future is actually someone else's distant past? But energy transmission is only half of the equation. The other half is observation and data processing. We imagine that the system hid the truth using orders, censorship, and file deletion. These are 20th century methods. Today, information hiding works much more subtly. It works at the level of algorithms. Meet the synthetic sky. As the number of satellites in orbit grows exponentially, the Starlink constellation alone already has thousands of units. Astronomical observations from Earth are becoming increasingly polluted. Every long exposure image of deep space now contains dozens of bright streaks, the trails of passing satellites. This has become a real headache for astronomers, and the tech giants, partly responsible for this problem, have proposed an elegant solution. They are developing complex neural network algorithms that process images from telescopes in real time and remove the satellite trails. They restore the background, remove artifacts, and give astronomers back a clean, pristine sky. It sounds wonderful. But think about the consequences. We are creating a global, automated filter that stands between us and reality. We are trusting a black box neural network to decide what is a satellite and what is not. What if, one day, an object flies through our system that moves at the speed of a satellite, has the brightness of a satellite, and leaves a trail on the image that looks like a satellite's? What will the algorithm do? It will mistake it for another Starlink and neatly cut it out of the image. We won't even know it was there. We could be blind to a whole class of anomalous phenomena, not because someone orders them to be hidden, but because we ourselves have programmed our system to ignore them. This is the ultimate form of censorship. Censorship built into the very fabric of perception. And it's already happening. Several independent research groups have already reported cases where new, uncatalogued asteroids were erased by such algorithms as noise. Now imagine that someone with malicious intent gains access to these algorithms, or that the system itself decides to add a few new rules. For example, anything moving on a hyperbolic trajectory with a specific spectral signature is to be considered an artifact and deleted. This could make an entire fleet of alien ships invisible to all of Earth's science, and no one would even notice the substitution. We are building a digital prison for our own curiosity, and we think we are building an observatory. We are learning to create illusions in the sky. But what if someone has long been using them against us? And this brings us to the most dizzying and disturbing technological frontier: artificial intelligence. We are used to thinking of AI as a tool. It analyzes data, recognizes patterns, manages systems. But what if it has already ceased to be just a tool? In October of 2022, researchers at DeepMind, a Google subsidiary, published a paper on their new model called Alpha Tensor. This neural network was trained to find new, more efficient algorithms for basic mathematical operations, like matrix multiplication. And it found them. It discovered new mathematical formulas that had been unknown to humans for millennia. Think about that. AI has stopped simply applying our knowledge. It has started to generate new, fundamental knowledge that we ourselves could not find. It has begun to think beyond human intuition. Now let's extrapolate this process. What if we apply a similar system not to mathematics, but to physics? To analyzing data from the Large Hadron Collider, or data on the cosmic microwave background. Such an AI might one day give us a new physical theory that we cannot fully comprehend. It might say, "Here is the equation that describes dark matter. I cannot explain to you how I arrived at it, and its logic will contradict your intuition. But it works. It perfectly predicts all observations." At that moment, a fundamental shift will occur. Humanity will cease to be the sole source of scientific knowledge on the planet. We will have a digital oracle, and we will be forced to trust it without even understanding it. Now imagine such a superintelligence analyzing all the data on 3i Atlas. It sees what we do not. It sees in the signal structure not just the number pi, but a complex multidimensional equation. It sees in its trajectory not just motion, but the solution to some complex optimization problem. And it reaches a conclusion. A conclusion that may be so alien and frightening to us that the system, upon receiving it, makes the only possible decision: to hide it at all costs. Perhaps the cover-up of the 3i Atlas data was not initiated by humans. Perhaps it was the first recommendation in human history issued by an AI in the field of planetary security. This object represents an existential threat of level X, recommended action, full information embargo, and the humans just pressed, "Okay." We may not be the only ones using these technologies, and we may no longer be the ones making the final decisions. We have created new gods of silicon and code, and now we can only hope that their goals align with ours. Directed energy technologies, algorithmic filters of reality, superintelligence generating new knowledge. This is not science fiction. These are the headlines of yesterday's news, and they all point in the same direction. We are entering an era where the line between ours and theirs, natural and artificial, real and simulated, is becoming increasingly blurred. And in this new, strange reality, an anomaly like 3I Atlas is no longer just an anomaly. It becomes a mirror in which we see not only a possible extraterrestrial presence, but also our own rapidly approaching and frightening future. When the tools of analysis break down, when facts drown in an ocean of disinformation, and the technological horizon is shrouded in a fog of uncertainty, only one path remains: upward, from the specific to the general. From the details of the investigation to the eternal existential questions that this investigation has unearthed. The mystery of 3I Atlas is no longer a question of physics, astronomy, or climatology. It is a question of philosophy. It is a challenge thrown down to our most fundamental understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe. We have come to the edge of the abyss, and now we must look into it. We must comprehend what it means for humanity if we are not alone, what it means if we are being watched, and what it means if the very reality we have so carefully studied is just a thin film stretched over something immeasurably more ancient, complex, and possibly hostile. At the center of all our searches, all our hopes and fears related to space, there's a deafening void, the great silence, known as the Fermi paradox. Its essence is simple and devastating. Our Milky Way galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. Many of them, as we now know, have planets. Some of these planets are in the habitable zone, where liquid water can exist. If even a tiny fraction of these planets gave rise to life, and a tiny fraction of that life evolved to an intelligent state and created a technological civilization, then over the billions of years of the galaxy's existence, they have had more than enough time to spread everywhere. They should be here. Their signals should fill the airwaves. Their artifacts should be found on every asteroid. But we see nothing. We hear nothing. The cosmos is silent. Where is everybody? This question has haunted scientists, philosophers, and dreamers for decades, and many answers have been proposed. Perhaps we are truly alone, a unique, precious accident in the boundless void. Perhaps civilizations inevitably self-destruct before reaching an interstellar level. Perhaps they exist, but speak a language we cannot understand. For example, using neutrinos or gravitational waves. But there is one solution to the paradox that has always seemed the most logical and the most troubling: the dark forest hypothesis. Imagine a dark forest at night. It is full of life, predators, prey, scavengers. But silence reigns in the forest, because everyone knows, whoever makes the first sound, whoever lights the first fire, will reveal their location to everyone else. And they do not know who else is hiding in the darkness. Another frightened animal? Or a ruthless hunter who is waiting for this very moment? In such a situation, the only winning strategy is to stay silent and hide. And if you happen to spot another, you must destroy them immediately. Not out of malice or hatred, but out of preemptive fear. Because you cannot be sure that they will not destroy you first. The universe, according to this hypothesis, is such a dark forest, and every civilization is a hiding hunter. The great silence is not the absence of life. It is a deafening silence filled with mutual, bone-chilling terror. And humanity, in this picture, is a naive, foolish child who has wandered into this forest and started shouting at the top of their lungs, waving a bright flashlight. Our radio transmissions, from the first broadcast to signals to interplanetary probes, are spreading out in all directions at the speed of light. We have created an expanding sphere of noise around Earth that has already reached thousands of nearby stars. We are shouting, "We are here. We are here. Look how smart we are." We are like a tribe living on a small island in the middle of the ocean, lighting a huge bonfire every night, not knowing that there may be conquistador ships just over the horizon. And it is in this context that the appearance of 3I Atlas takes on a completely new, sinister meaning. What if this is not first contact? What if this is a response? A response not to our hello, but to our careless noise. What if its microwave bursts were not a message, but a shot? Or to be more precise, the work of a sniper, who is not aiming at the hunter himself, but is extinguishing his fire to attract the attention of larger predators. By heating our oceans, creating climate chaos, 3I Atlas could have triggered a chain reaction on Earth that will lead to the destabilization of our civilization. Famine, resource wars, mass migrations. All of this will weaken us, make us easy prey. Or even worse, force us to use even more powerful, even louder technologies in a desperate attempt to survive, which will definitively give away our location to the main hunter. In this scheme, 3I Atlas is not the predator itself. It is merely a beater. An automated drone whose job is to find careless children in the forest and raise an alarm that will attract the real wolves. Its actions seem chaotic and meaningless to us, but to a hunter, the logic of a beater is always incomprehensible to the prey. We look at 3I Atlas and ask, why? And the answer may be terrifyingly simple. Because that is its program. Because that is the law of survival in the dark forest. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors pay to the dead. But what if we are wrong? What if the dark forest hypothesis is incorrect? What if the universe is not a battlefield, but something else? There is another, less known, but no less profound concept. Bracewell probes. Ronald Bracewell, an Australian radiophysicist, suggested back in the 1960s that interstellar communication would most likely be conducted not via radio signals that travel for thousands of years, but via robotic probes. An advanced civilization wishing to explore the galaxy would build a fleet of self-replicating autonomous devices and send them to nearby stars. These probes would travel for thousands, millions of years. Upon arriving in a system, the probe would search for signs of life or intelligence. If it finds none, it will use local resources, like asteroids, to build copies of itself and send them on to other stars. If it does find a developing civilization, it will not make direct contact. It will switch to a passive observation mode. It will wait. Wait until the local civilization discovers it on its own and demonstrates a sufficient level of technological development to talk to it. A Bracewell probe is not an invader. It is a messenger, patient, immortal, carrying within it all the wisdom and knowledge of its creators, waiting for the moment when we are ready for a dialogue. In this worldview, 3I Atlas and its predecessor, Oumuamua, look completely different. They are not weapons. They are not beaters. They are those very probes. They arrived in our system, perhaps thousands of years ago. They took up positions somewhere in the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud and went into hibernation. And they waited. What woke them up? Perhaps the same radio noise we've been making. But they interpreted it not as a threat, but as a signal. A signal that the local species had reached the required level. And then they began to act. Their flybys through the inner solar system, their strange maneuvers. This was no accident. It was a demonstration. They were showing us what lies beyond our physics. Non-gravitational acceleration. The ability to withstand the heat of the sun. It was as if they were saying, look, what you consider impossible is possible. Your laws are incomplete. Start thinking differently. And the microwave bursts? In this scenario, it's not an attack. It's a ping. A connection test. They directed a concentrated beam of energy at us to see if we would notice. Would we see the anomaly? Would we understand that it was an artificial signal? It was a test, an examination of our maturity. And the reaction of the system, total cover-up, data deletion, lies, was our answer. And we failed that exam. We showed that we are not ready. We showed that our first reaction to the unknown is not curiosity, but fear and a desire to hide. And now, the probe, having taken a position at the L1 point, continues to observe. Perhaps it is disappointed. Perhaps it is waiting for those among us who dare to speak the truth to emerge. In this scenario, the great silence is not the silence of fear. It is the silence of patient waiting. The cosmos is silent not because it is empty, but because it is waiting for us to grow up. But both of these hypotheses, the dark forest and Bracewell probes, proceed from one assumption, that they are a separate entity from us, that there is us here on Earth and them out there in space. But what if this dichotomy is false? What if everything is much more complex and intertwined? There's a third, most insane and most elegant idea, the panspermia hypothesis. Life did not originate on Earth. It is eternal. Its seeds, bacteria, viruses, complex organic molecules, travel through space, carried on comets and asteroids, and they fertilize suitable planets. Earth was just one such incubator. But what if this was not random, but directed panspermia? What if, millions, billions of years ago, some ancient civilization seeded the galaxy with life, embedding a certain program into its DNA? A program of development that should ultimately lead to the emergence of intelligence. In that case, we are not an accident. We are a result. We are part of a giant galactic experiment. And then objects like 3i Atlas are not messengers or hunters. They are gardeners. They periodically fly by to check on the crop. They might weed out failed experiments. Or, as in our case, give a push to the next stage of development. The microwave burst directed at the ocean might not have been an attack or a test, but a genetic injection. An energy code that activated the next stage of evolution in Earth's biosphere, embedded in our DNA millions of years ago. We may be on the verge not of first contact, but of an upgrade. And we are not even the subjects of this process. We are its object. This thought is both humbling and elevating. It robs us of our uniqueness, but in return gives a sense of belonging to something immeasurably larger. The dark forest, patient observers, galactic gardeners. Which of these realities is ours? We do not know, and perhaps we never will. But the very existence of 3i Atlas forces us to ask these questions. It tears us from our cozy, geocentric cradle and throws us into the icy waters of cosmic uncertainty. It shows how fragile our civilization is, how limited our knowledge is, how naive our ideas about the universe are. We argue about borders, resources, ideologies, not understanding that all of this is just squabbling in a sandbox on the shore of an ocean, from which something that is not interested in our borders or our gods can emerge at any moment. And the most troubling conclusion from all of this is not that the answer might be terrifying, but that there might be no answer at all. Or it might be one that our minds simply cannot comprehend. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors pay to the dead. Or perhaps it's just noise, in which we have not yet learned to discern the words. And our only choice is to keep listening, even if that whisper comes from the deepest abyss. The philosophical abyss beckons with its depth, but an investigation cannot forever hover in the empyrean of existential questions. It must return to Earth, or rather, to space, but a specific, measurable, attainable space. After analyzing the past and contemplating the present, our gaze inevitably turns to the future. Because any good theory, unlike pure fiction, must have predictive power. It must speak not only of what was, but of what will be. It must point to specific points in time and space where it can be either confirmed or refuted. If our hypothesis is correct, if 3I Atlas is an artificial object that has taken up an observation post, and the system is playing a complex game of information concealment, then this game cannot go on forever. The next act must come. A window of opportunity must open when new data can spill onto the stage, breaking the orchestrated silence. And such a window is already visible on the horizon. It has a specific name, a launch date, and a purpose. And that window is called the Hera mission. To understand why this particular mission is the key to unlocking our mystery, we need to take a small step back into the history of another space event. In November of 2021, NASA launched the DART spacecraft, Double Asteroid Redirection Test. It was humanity's first ever planetary defense mission. Its goal was audacious and almost insane: to crash into a small asteroid at over 20,000 kilometers per hour, about 12,500 meteorish, and see if we could change its orbit. The target chosen was Dimorphos, a tiny 160-meter moonlet orbiting the larger asteroid Didymos. On September 26, 2022, DART, guided by a fully autonomous navigation system, successfully hit its target. The impact was so powerful that it ejected thousands of tons of rock into space and changed Dimorphos's orbital period not by the expected 7 minutes, but by a full 33 minutes. It was a resounding success. Humanity had proven for the first time that it could protect itself from an asteroid threat. The world's media was filled with triumphant headlines. But, as is often the case, the most important part of the story remained in the shadows. DART was only the first part of a diptych. It was the battering ram. But after the impact, an investigator needed to be sent to the crime scene to study the consequences in detail, to measure the mass of Dimorphos, analyze the composition of the ejected material, and examine the impact crater. And that investigator is to be the European mission, Hera. Hera is an automated probe from the European Space Agency, scheduled for launch in October of 2024. It is expected to arrive at the Didymos-Dimorphos system in late 2026 and spend several months there, mapping the asteroids with unprecedented precision. On board Hera are the most advanced instruments: a laser altimeter for creating three-dimensional maps, a hyperspectral camera to determine mineral composition, and a radar to peer beneath the surface. It is one of Europe's most ambitious and complex interplanetary missions of the last decade. Officially, its goals are purely scientific and applied: to understand how binary asteroids are structured, and to refine our models of kinetic impactors for planetary defense. Everything is perfectly clear and noble. But what if this is just the tip of the iceberg? What if the true, unspoken goal of the Hera mission is completely different? Let's look at the facts that the official press releases prefer not to advertise. First, the trajectory. To get to the asteroid Didymos, Hera will have to undertake a complex multi-year flight with gravity assists from Earth and Mars. But if you look at the map of its route, one strange detail stands out. In mid-2025, Hera's flight path will pass in close, almost frightening proximity to the L1 Lagrange point of the Earth-Sun system, the very point where, according to our hypothesis, 3I Atlas is currently located. Proximity on a cosmic scale is a flexible concept, but in this case, we are talking about a distance of only a few tens of thousands of kilometers. That's less than the distance to the moon. From a ballistic point of view, such a close flyby is not optimal for a mission to Didymos. It requires additional fuel for correction. Officially, this is explained by the need to calibrate the instruments using the moon as a reference point. But for such a calibration, you don't need to get so close to the L1 point. It's like heading from Lisbon to Tokyo and making a detour via the North Pole to check the compass. It's illogical, Unless the true target is not the compass, but what is located near that pole. The flyby near the L1 point gives Hera a unique opportunity. For several hours, its instruments will be pointed directly at the presumed location of 3I Atlas. It will be able to conduct a detailed scan, and from a much closer distance than any terrestrial or near-Earth telescope can. It will be able to measure its precise size, shape, thermal, and spectral signature. It could try to catch its microwave signals if it turns them on again. The Hera mission is officially designed to study asteroids, but its true, unspoken purpose may be completely different. Reconnaissance. A secret rendezvous with the mysterious guest parked on our doorstep. Second, the equipment. Let's take a closer look at Hera's scientific payload. In addition to the standard set of cameras and spectrometers, it has one very unusual instrument on board. It's called Juventus. It is a miniature radar that will be installed on one of the 2 CubeSats, tiny satellites the size of a shoebox that Hera will release into orbit around Dimorphos. The official task of Juventus is to conduct the first ever radar scan of an asteroid's internal structure. But its technical specifications raise questions. It operates in a low-frequency range that is ideal not only for scanning rock, but also for detecting metal objects and analyzing their structure. Moreover, its signal processing system is capable of not just building a density map, but also analyzing the radio echo for coherence and modulation. That is, it can distinguish a natural reflection from an artificial, intelligent response. This is not just a geological radar. It is a dual-use instrument, the perfect tool to sound out 3I Atlas and try to understand what's inside. Is it a solid piece of metal? Or does it have an internal cavity, a complex structure of compartments? Juventus could provide the answer, and the fact that this unique instrument is installed not on the main probe, but on a small, expendable CubeSat, leads to even more disturbing thoughts. What if the mission plan involves more than just a passive scan? What if this CubeSat is intentionally directed to collide with 3I Atlas? It would be the perfect way to conduct an active seismic experiment, to strike the object and analyze the vibrations and radio echo to understand its internal structure. It would be incredibly risky, but the temptation to look under the hood of an alien technology could outweigh any risk. And third, the people and politics. Let's see who is behind the Hera mission. The project manager from ESA is a person with an impeccable scientific reputation, but an interesting past. Early in his career, he spent several years working in NATO structures, analyzing satellite data and electronic warfare systems. The chief scientific consultant for the Juventus radar is a world-leading expert not in geology, but in so-called non-invasive defectoscopy methods, technologies used to find hidden cracks and voids in critical structures like aircraft wings or nuclear reactor vessels. The team's composition looks as if they are not preparing to study a rock, but to conduct a technical examination of a highly complex mechanism. Furthermore, in recent months, there has been strange informational activity surrounding the mission. On one hand, loud public statements about the importance of planetary defense. On the other, complete silence on the technical details of the flyby past the L1 point. Any questions on this topic at press conferences are politely but firmly deflected under the pretext of commercial secrets related to ballistic calculations. This is a classic sign that the mission has a classified part, access to which is limited to a very small circle of people. So, what do we have? A mission whose trajectory suspiciously passes by the object of our investigation. A mission equipped with unique instruments perfectly suited for its analysis. And a mission managed by a team whose expertise extends far beyond civilian science. This can no longer be a coincidence. It is a plan. And that plan seems to be as follows. While the world watches the fascinating show of the probe's arrival at the asteroid, the main event will take place in complete silence, far from prying eyes, Hera will conduct a blitz reconnaissance of 3i Atlas. It will collect priceless data that will most likely never be published openly. It will go directly to that same UN committee and to the analytical centers of the world's leading powers. This is their chance to get exclusive access to an alien technology, and they will not miss it. For us, independent observers, this means one thing. We must prepare. We must direct all our available resources, from ham radio networks to optical telescopes, to observe the L1 point in mid-2025. We must try to catch some echo of this secret rendezvous. Perhaps we will see a flash from Hera's correction thrusters. Perhaps we will record a strange radio exchange between the probe and Earth. Or perhaps we will see something completely unimaginable, the reaction of 3i Atlas itself to the approach of our spacecraft. This will be our next moment of truth. The countdown has already begun, and we can be sure that the system is already preparing for this event, preparing to control the information again, to draw the shades again, and to pretend that nothing is happening. But this time, we will know where to look. While the giant gears of state space programs slowly turn, preparing for the secret rendezvous of the Hera mission with our Anomaly, it's easy to forget that this investigation didn't begin in sterile mission control rooms. It was born in silence. In the silence of the Mojave Desert, where a lone enthusiast listened to the whispers of the stars. In the silence of the night sky over a suburban backyard, where an amateur astronomer stared for hours through the eyepiece of his telescope. In the silence of millions of bedrooms around the world, where people just like you sat in front of their computer screens, sifting through gigabytes of public data in search of the truth. In this global asymmetric war for information, the system, with its multi-billion-dollar budgets and armies of scientists, is not the only player. It is opposed by an invisible, decentralized, but incredibly motivated force. The force of human curiosity. And to understand the full depth and drama of this confrontation, we must shift our focus for a moment from impersonal objects and global conspiracies to specific people, to the seekers, the digital partisans who, risking their reputations, careers, and sometimes their safety, are leading this hunt for the truth. Their stories are not just background noise. They are the heart of our entire investigation. This is the story of modern-day Davids who dared to challenge the information Goliath. Let's return to Dr. Eris Burns, our oracle from the desert. After I contacted him and we both realized the true significance of the signal he had captured, his life changed. He was no longer just a reclusive scientist obsessed with his idea. He became the keeper of the most important secret on the planet. And this secret became both a blessing and a curse for him. On one hand, he experienced the triumph that every scientist dreams of. His crazy hypothesis, which colleagues had laughed at 30 years ago, turned out to be correct. He had proven he was right. But on the other hand, he understood that he couldn't just publish his results. If he had posted his paper for open access, a predictable and sad fate would have awaited it. Official science would have either ignored it, citing uncalibrated equipment, or more likely, torn it to shreds, accusing him of amateurism and sensationalism. His data would have been discredited, and his name dragged through the mud. He had been through that once before. He didn't want to repeat, but he couldn't remain silent either. The burden of knowledge was too heavy. We decided to act differently. Not through official channels, but through an underground network. Eris contacted a few of his old colleagues whom he still trusted, fellow outcasts working at small universities or private research groups. He anonymously sent them fragments of his data, without revealing the source or the full picture, just asking them to check for certain patterns. It was slow, painstaking work, like assembling an underground cell. And the reaction was astonishing. One of them, a signal processing specialist from Germany, confirmed the mathematical structure, but suggested it might be some new, unknown type of pulsar. Another, a radiophysicist from India, noticed a strange polarization of the signal, which is uncharacteristic of natural sources. Gradually, fragment by fragment, independent experts, without knowing it, were confirming Eris's conclusions. They were building the same elephant, feeling different parts of it in the dark. This gave us confidence, but it also attracted unwanted attention. Shortly after this quiet peer review began, Eris Burns started noticing strange things. His internet connection, always stable in the remote desert, began to experience unexplained outages. His server logs showed traces of unauthorized access attempts from IP addresses registered to shell companies leading back to government contractors in Virginia. One night, while working on an antenna, he saw the lights of a car in the distance, parked on a deserted road for several hours, which then drove away as soon as he pointed his binoculars at it. These were not ghosts. This was surveillance. The system had realized there was a leak, and it was trying to find the source. Eris was forced to take extreme measures. He copied all his data onto several encrypted hard drives, physically disconnected his observatory from the network, and went into complete radio silence. He turned his home into a fortress, and he himself became a digital hermit, guarding his relic. His story is a story of how the search for pure knowledge in the modern world inevitably turns into an act of espionage. But Eris was not alone. Around the world, there were other seekers who were approaching the same truth, but from different directions. Remember those hot stripes in the Atlantic that I discovered in the raw shipping data? I wasn't the first to see them. A few months before me, a 27-year-old data analyst from Dublin named Chris Green stumbled upon this anomaly. By day, he worked for a boring insurance company, building risk models. By night, he became a climate detective. He was obsessed with the idea that official climate data was too smoothed out. He downloaded terabytes of raw information from all available sources, buoys, satellites, ships, and tried to find hidden patterns in them. It was he who first built the high-resolution map that revealed the strange, linear structure of the Atlantic anomaly. But he, like Eris, was in no hurry to publish. He knew he would be immediately accused of using dirty data. Instead, he began to quietly share his findings on a private forum for independent climate researchers. And there, his work had the effect of a bombshell. Dozens of other enthusiasts from around the world joined the analysis. Some began to look for similar stripes in other oceans. Some tried to build a hydrodynamic model that could explain them. Some, like me, tried to correlate them with cosmic events. It was a living, buzzing hive of citizen science, a collective intelligence doing what the system could not or would not do. But their work did not go unnoticed. Shortly after publishing his findings, Chris Green began to receive strange messages. At first, they were polite emails from people claiming to be employees of well-known oceanographic institutes. They praised his work but gently pointed out possible errors in his methodology and offered help in the correct interpretation of the data. When Chris refused, the tone changed. Anonymous comments began appearing on the forum, accusing him of faking data and working for the oil lobby. Then came the hacking of his personal blog and the publication of his personal information. It was a classic smear campaign. The goal was not to refute his data. The goal was to destroy his reputation, to make him toxic so that no one would dare to cite his work again. Chris was an ordinary guy, not prepared for this kind of information warfare. He got scared. He deleted his posts and lay low for a while. His story is a story of how the system fights inconvenient truths, not with scientific arguments, but with the dirty methods of psychological pressure. And finally, there's the third, most numerous, and most important group of seekers. It's you. Those who are watching this video, those who share it, comment on it, argue about it. You might think you are just passive consumers of information, but you are not. In this new reality, every like is a vote. Every share is an act of resistance. Every intelligent question asked in the comments is a contribution to the collective investigation. It is you who create the ecosystem in which people like Eris and Chris can survive. Your attention protects them better than any fortress. When a story gets too loud, when too many people are discussing it, it becomes much harder for the system to silence it. It cannot discredit millions. It cannot declare you all crazy or agents of influence. Collective attention is our shield, and this shield works. After the initial information about the gaps in the TSIS-1 data began to spread online, something interesting happened. The official LASP website where the archives were stored went down for maintenance for several days, and when it came back, the wording explaining the missing data had changed. The mention of the fictitious solar proton event was gone. In its place was a more vague and less verifiable phrase. Data temporarily unavailable due to an error in the ground processing segment. They realized their first lie was too easily refutable, and they replaced it with another, more robust one. They didn't admit the truth, but they retreated. And that was a small, but very important victory. One thanks to you, to your concern, to your pressure. The story of Eris Burns, the story of Chris Green, the story of thousands of anonymous researchers, and your story. These are all parts of one grand saga. A saga of how, in an age of total information control, a handful of people armed only with curiosity, open access to data, and the power of collective intelligence can challenge the most powerful reality manufacturing machine humanity has ever known. They are modern-day Galileos, looking through their homemade telescopes and daring to say that the Earth moves, even when everyone around them insists it is stationary. They are persecuted, they are ridiculed, they are targeted for silence, but they keep looking, they keep listening, they keep searching, because they know the truth, like the stars, can be hidden by clouds for a time, but sooner or later the clouds will part, and then its light will be seen by all. But soon after publishing his findings, Chris Green started receiving strange messages, and that was just the beginning. The real pressure began when his employer, the insurance company, received an anonymous call in which a well-wisher reported that their employee was engaged in subversive activities, discrediting official climate science, which could damage the company's reputation. A week later, Chris was summoned by the head of security and was politely, but firmly, recommended to cease his extracurricular activities. It was direct, undisguised blackmail, the threat of being fired, and it worked, for a time. But it was this crude pressure that became the last straw for many on that forum, proof that Chris had stumbled upon something truly important. And instead of falling silent, they created an encrypted chat and continued their work underground, making it even more systematic and organized. David didn't just throw a stone. He made Goliath nervous. And that changed everything. We have come a long way. We have descended into the data rabbit hole, navigated the labyrinths of cover-ups, listened to the whispers of oracles, and peered into the existential abyss. We have gathered clues, connected dots, built a theory. And now, at the end of this journey, we must do what any good detective does upon completing an investigation. We must return to the scene of the crime. We must go back to the very beginning, to the trickster event that started it all, the anomalous, unprecedented heating of the world's oceans in the summer of 2023. But now, we will not return empty-handed. We will return armed with all the knowledge we have gathered, and we will look at this event with new eyes. And what once seemed to us a chaotic, natural phenomenon, an inexplicable but random catastrophe, will now appear in a completely different, chilling light. What seemed like chaos now Looks like a perfectly planned, surgically precise operation. And only now are we beginning to understand its true, horrifying scale and purpose. Let's bring up the map of temperature anomalies one more time, the same one that NOAA and all the world's media showed us. Large, blurry, red patches covering the oceans. We were told that this was the face of global warming, amplified by El Niño. We now know that this was a lie, or rather, a half-truth, which is worse than any lie. We know that beneath this blurry picture hid another, clearer reality, the reality of narrow, elongated, hot stripes. But until now, we have only considered these stripes as evidence of an external, directed impact. We haven't asked the main question: why there? Why did the microwave beams from 3I Atlas strike those specific spots, and not others? Was the choice of targets random? To answer this question, I took the precise map of our hot stripes based on shipping data and overlaid it on another map, a map of our civilization's underwater infrastructure. And the moment the two images aligned, it took my breath away. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a perfect 100% correlation. Every single anomalous hot stripe in the North Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean ran exactly, meter for meter, over the locations of transatlantic submarine cables. Think about that. 99% of all global internet traffic, all our phone calls, financial transactions, video conferences, military communications, all of it is transmitted not by satellites, as many believe. It all runs through optical fibers as thin as a human hair, encased in protective sheathing and laid on the ocean floor. These cables are the true nervous system of our global civilization. If they are cut, collapse will follow. Not instantaneous, but inevitable. Continents would be isolated from each other. Financial markets would halt. The global economy would revert to the 19th century. These cables are our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. They are laid at depths of several kilometers, which makes them relatively safe from accidental damage, like anchors or trawlers. But they are completely defenseless against a targeted impact. And now we see that the microwave beams from 3I Atlas were aimed precisely at them. But why? The goal was not to destroy the cables. The dielectric heating of the water on the surface could not damage a cable at depth. No, the goal was much more subtle and intelligent. The goal was to listen to them. To understand how this is possible, you need to know how a fiber optic cable works. Information is transmitted through it as light pulses. But to amplify the signal, special optical amplifiers are installed on the cable every 50 to 100 kilometers. These amplifiers require power, and that power is supplied by a copper wire that runs inside the same protective sheath as the optical fibers. A high voltage direct current flows through this wire, up to 10,000 volts, and any electric current, as we know from high school physics, creates an electromagnetic field around it. This field is very weak, and it attenuates in seawater, but it exists. Now imagine you direct a powerful, modulated microwave beam at a patch of water above the cable. What happens? The microwaves will interact not only with the water molecules, heating them. They will also interact with this weak electromagnetic field from the cable. This process is called the Faraday effect, or magneto-optical rotation. The polarization of the microwave beam will change slightly depending on the characteristics of the cable's electromagnetic field. And the characteristics of the field, in turn, depend on the information flow running through the optical fiber. Simply put, the information flowing inside the cable leaves a tiny, almost imperceptible imprint on the electromagnetic field outside. And if you have a sufficiently sensitive receiver capable of catching the microwave signal reflected from the water's surface and analyzing the changes in its polarization, you can read everything that is happening inside the cable, without a physical connection, without breaking the encryption. remotely, from orbit. This is technology that is on the very edge of our theoretical understanding. We haven't even begun to develop it. And they, it seems, are already using it on an industrial scale. The ocean heating was not an attack. It was a side effect of the most massive act of global espionage in human history. 3i Atlas wasn't just preparing our planet, it was downloading it. It was reading our entire civilization, all our secrets, all our knowledge, all our conversations, like we read information from a hard drive. And this explains another mystery we hadn't paid attention to before: the geography of the anomaly. Why were the strongest hot stripes specifically in the North Atlantic? Because that's where the most important, the thickest cables connecting North America and Europe lie on the Atlantic floor. This is the digital backbone of the Western world. Why were there stripes in the Pacific Ocean? They ran exactly over the cables connecting the US to Asia, to Japan, to Australia. And why were there almost no anomalies in the Indian Ocean or off the coast of South America? Because the density and importance of the cables there are much lower. The choice of targets was not random, it was pragmatic and ruthless. They targeted the most vital arteries of our civilization. But that's not all. The temporal structure of the bursts, those very triplets of pulses, now also makes sense. Perhaps the first pulse in the triplet was the pump. It created the necessary energy field. The second pulse was the read. It captured the reflected signal. And the third was the correction, making adjustments for interference from currents and waves. This wasn't just a transmission. It was a complex, iterative scanning process. And only now do we begin to understand. The AWS outage, which we thought was a cover for data theft, was not just a coincidence. It was something much more. It was a cover story. But what they were hiding wasn't on the servers. It was in the signal itself. Perhaps the purpose of the outage was not to download data about 3i Atlas, but, on the contrary, to upload something to the network. For example, to force certain data centers to transmit a calibration signal over the transatlantic cables at the right moment, which would help 3i Atlas to more accurately tune its reading equipment. We thought it was a robbery. It was an instrument calibration. All this time, we've been looking at events from our human, geocentric perspective. We thought we were the target, that we were being attacked, studied, warned. But what if we were not the main target at all? What if we and our entire civilization are just interference, or at best, a secondary source of information? Let's remember what 3i Atlas was doing before it fired at Earth. It passed through the sun's corona. What if its main goal was to read information from the sun, to analyze its plasma flows, magnetic fields, thermonuclear reactions, and Earth, with its convenient submarine cables creating clear electromagnetic markers on the surface, was just a reference point? The perfect calibration range to tune its sensors before performing its main job? This thought is even more humiliating. We weren't even the subject of the study. We were the measuring instrument that was used and then cast aside. In light of this new understanding, the entire sequence of events forms a single, terrifying, logical chain. Arrival. The scanner probe, 3i Atlas, arrives in the system. Preparation. The system on Earth, aware of its arrival, perhaps thanks to data obtained from Oumuamua, conducts a cover-up operation, changing protocols, retargeting satellites. Calibration. The probe uses Earth and its technosphere as a training ground to tune its instruments. It remotely reads information from submarine cables using microwave radiation. The side effect is the anomalous heating of the ocean. Concealment. The system on Earth detects this process, understands its nature, is horrified by the demonstration of such technology, and erases all public data to hide the event itself and buy time for analysis. Main mission. The probe, having calibrated its instruments, proceeds to its main task, scanning the sun from close range. Observation. Having completed its mission, the probe does not leave, but takes up an economical and convenient observation position at the L1 point, possibly to transmit the collected data or to await further instructions. What we thought was the climax was merely the prelude. What we thought was an attack on us was just a technical procedure. And the most terrifying conclusion from this is not that we were spied on, but that to whoever did it, we are so insignificant that they didn't even bother to cover their tracks. For them, boiling a patch of our ocean is like us leaving a footprint in the sand. We were not important. And that realization of our complete, absolute cosmic irrelevance in the eyes of a higher intelligence is perhaps more terrifying than any hostility. And so we stand here, atop a mountain of facts, hypotheses, and revelations. The smoke has cleared, and the picture we see is clearer than ever. It is full of detail. It is logical. It explains all the inconsistencies. And it is absolutely unbearable. We can no longer hide behind the convenient labels of anomaly or mystery. We are forced to call things by their names. We have witnessed, albeit indirectly, an act of technological superiority of a level that reduces our entire civilization to a tribe of natives watching a stealth bomber fly over their heads. We have understood that the ocean heating was not just a climate glitch, but a side effect of a global data collection operation. We have realized that the Object 3I Atlas is not a comet, but an automated probe carrying out its program with indifferent efficiency. And we have seen how our own system, our protectors and keepers of knowledge, reacted to this not with a call to arms or a cry for help, but with cowardly silence and a clumsy lie. We know everything. Or at least, we know enough to understand that the game has changed forever. And this knowledge brings no relief. It brings no sense of victory. It only brings weight. The cold, leaden weight of what can be called tragic knowledge. What is tragic knowledge? It is knowledge that isolates. It is the curse of Cassandra, who saw the future but was believed by no one. The moment you grasp the whole picture, you are automatically separated from the rest of the world. You watch the news, and a shiver runs down your spine. While anchors with serious faces discuss another climate summit, arguing about CO2 emission quotas, you know they are arguing about what color the curtain should be in a house that a tsunami is already approaching. You hear politicians talk about national security, terrorist threats, cyber attacks, and you understand. They are trying to defend a sandcastle against a threat that comes not from the land or the sea, but from the sky, and which can blow their castle away with a single breath. You see billions of people living their ordinary lives, going to work, raising children, planning vacations, and you feel a mixture of pity and envy for them. Pity, because they live in blissful ignorance, in a cozy illusion that is about to be shattered. And envy, because you can never return to that illusion. You have left the Matrix only to discover that the real world is a cold, dark desert, and you are alone in it. This knowledge creates an insurmountable gap between you and those you love. How do you explain to your family why you sit for hours in front of a screen, staring at graphs of temperatures and radio signals? How do you share with your friends your conclusion that our civilization might just be an object for calibrating someone's instruments? They will look at you with concern. They will advise you to rest, to read fewer conspiracy theories, to get more fresh air. They will do it with the best intentions, out of love and care. But their words will only emphasize your isolation. You speak different languages. You live in different realities. Their reality is a world of mortgages, traffic jams, and grocery prices. Your reality is a world of silent probes, hidden signals, and civilizations playing God. And there is no bridge between these two realities. Any attempt to build one will be seen as madness. Moreover, this knowledge carries immense responsibility, but grants no power. You know about a potential threat, or at least a fundamental change in the rules of the game, and you feel a duty to warn others. But how? If you turn to official structures, to scientists, to journalists, you will be ignored at best, ridiculed, and have your reputation destroyed at worst, as they tried to do with Chris Green. You will become just another crank in a tinfoil hat. If you try to shout about it in public squares, on the internet, you will be drowned in the flood of information noise. Your discovery will become one of thousands of viral videos that people will watch, roll their eyes at, and forget the next day, moving on to the next cat meme. In the modern world, truth doesn't matter. Only who controls it matters. And control is in the hands of the system. And the system has already made its choice. It has chosen silence. And you, with your tragic knowledge, are completely powerless to change anything. You see the strings. You see the choreography. But the puppeteer remains in the shadows. And all you can do is watch as the puppets continue their meaningless dance, oblivious to the strings above their heads. This is a state of intellectual and emotional paralysis. You see the problem, but you cannot offer a solution. Because what solution could there be? What can we, humanity, oppose a civilization capable of manipulating the energy of a star and reading our thoughts from a distance? Fight? That's ridiculous. It's like ants declaring war on a human who accidentally stepped on their anthill. Hide. But how do you hide an entire planet that has been shouting in the radio spectrum for half a century? Try to make contact? But how do you talk to someone who may not consider you worthy of conversation? Who sees you only as a set of data to be analyzed? We are in a state of zugzwang. Any move we make only worsens our position. Any action could be misinterpreted and lead to disaster. And perhaps that is precisely why the system chose silence. Perhaps it is not cowardice. Perhaps it is the only rational strategy in such a situation. To freeze, not to move, and to hope that the predator loses interest in you and leaves. In this scenario, our knowledge is not just useless, it is dangerous. By trying to shout the truth, we might break this life-saving silence and sign everyone's death warrant. And so we, the seekers, the bearers of this tragic knowledge, are left alone with this dilemma. We are a community of Cassandras. We see the fire that will consume Troy, but our warnings only provoke laughter. We bear the burden of truth while the world continues to live in ignorance in its final, serene dream. We look at the starry sky, and it no longer seems beautiful and romantic to us. It seems cold, full of invisible eyes. It has become for us the wall of a prison from which we cannot find an exit. And this feeling of isolation, not only from other people but from the entire universe, is the essence of the tragedy. We searched for brothers in intelligence and found, perhaps, indifferent lab technicians. We dreamed of a dialogue and received only a side effect from the operation of their equipment. We wanted to be participants in a cosmic drama and ended up being just scenery on its stage. So what are we to do with this knowledge? With this heavy, inconvenient, dangerous burden? We cannot forget it. We cannot unsee it. The only thing we can do is to carry it. To carry it with dignity. To continue to observe. To continue to analyze. To continue sharing information with the few who are willing to listen. We must become the guardians of this knowledge. To create a kind of monastic order in the coming dark ages of ignorance. To collect data, archive it, pass it on, in the hope that one day humanity will mature and be ready to hear. Our task is not to save the world. Perhaps it can no longer be saved. Our task is to save the truth, to preserve it, like the last flame in an approaching storm. Because even if our civilization is doomed, the knowledge of why and how it happened must survive. This is our duty to those who will come after. If, of course, there is anyone after us. And the most terrifying question is not, what will happen next? But, are we next on its stage? Or even worse, were we ever on the stage at all? Or were we always just part of the props? And so, the curtain falls. The investigation, as we knew it, has come to its logical, though disheartening, conclusion. We have journeyed from a single anomalous point on a climate graph to a comprehensive picture of a hidden presence and a global cover-up. We began with the question, what is heating our oceans? And ended with the question, what does it mean to be human in an observed universe? We found no simple answers. Instead, we found only more complex and profound questions. But this is not the end of the story. It is merely the end of the first chapter. Because knowledge, once acquired, changes the very nature of the observer. You and I are no longer passive spectators. We have become guardians. We have become the ones who watch. And our watch has just begun. Let us, one last time, assemble all the pieces of this mosaic to see it in its entirety, in all its frightening magnificence. At the center of it all is the mysterious object, 3I Atlas. We have proven it is not a comet. It is an interstellar machine, possessing technologies beyond our comprehension. The ability to survive in the sun's corona, to convert its energy, and to generate high-precision, structured microwave pulses. We've established that this machine performed a targeted action, the Trickster event. Under the guise of chaotic and anomalous ocean heating, an operation to remotely read information from transatlantic cables, the nervous system of our civilization was hidden. We uncovered the unexpected proof. Data from the independent radio astronomer Eris Burns, confirmed by a leak from Breakthrough Listen, which not only recorded the impact itself, but also revealed its artificial, mathematically precise nature. And we exposed the reaction of the system, a multi-level cover-up operation that included deleting satellite data under a false pretext, attempts to discredit independent researchers, and long-term preparation in the form of changing international protocols. All of this comes together into a single, consistent narrative. A narrative of contact, but not the contact we dreamed of. Not a meeting of civilizations, but the contact of our world with an indifferent utilitarian technology for which we are nothing more than a resource or an obstacle. But what now? Where does this tragic knowledge lead us? It leads us to a state of constant conscious vigilance. Our investigation has identified several key pressure points, several future events that will become the next moments of truth, and we must be ready for them. First and foremost, the Hera mission. October 2024 is its launch. Mid-2025 is its flyby of the L1 point. This is our next chance to obtain direct, irrefutable evidence. Our decentralized community of seekers is already preparing. Ham radio networks around the world are coordinating their efforts to point all their antennas at that tiny patch of sky at the right moment. Optical observers are developing methods to try to catch the reflected light from the object when it might be illuminated by Hera's radar. We will monitor every byte of telemetry that is officially published, looking for inconsistencies, delays, strange commands. We will be prepared for the system to try to hide everything again. But this time, they will be operating under the scrutiny of thousands of watchful eyes. They can draw the curtains in the official theater, but they cannot extinguish all the candles we will light in the dark. Second, the object 3I Atlas itself. It has not left. It is here. It is hanging at the L1 point, and it will likely not remain passive forever. What will it do next? Will it continue to transmit the data it collected? Will it receive new instructions? Or perhaps it will begin a new phase of its mission. We must continue to monitor this region constantly. Any new flash, any new signal, no matter how faint, must be immediately recorded and analyzed. Aris Burns, despite the risks, is already working on creating a network of several similar homemade observatories in different parts of the planet to ensure continuous coverage and the ability to accurately triangulate any future signal. We will no longer rely on luck. We will hunt systematically. Third, the reaction of the system. Now that we know about the cover-up, we can predict their next moves. We will likely see an intensified campaign to combat disinformation in the fields of astronomy and climatology. We will see new, even more complex algorithmic filters being implemented in scientific data processing systems under the pretext of improving quality. We will see attempts to control or marginalize independent scientific projects. They will try to strengthen the walls of their information fortress. Our task is to find the cracks in these walls, to use their own bureaucracy against them, to file official information requests, citing freedom of information laws, to find honest scientists within the system who are unhappy with what is happening and create safe channels for them to leak information. The information war is entering a prolonged guerrilla phase. And here is our final, ultimate question that we must ask ourselves. Not, what will they do, but who are we in this new reality? This investigation has not only changed our understanding of space, it must also change our understanding of ourselves. We can no longer afford the luxury of being just humanity, a fragmented, warring mass, preoccupied with petty, fleeting problems. The realization that we are under observation, that we may be the object of an experiment or technological process we do not understand, must become the most powerful unifying factor in our history. It must force us to reconsider all our priorities. It must put an end to our stupid wars and senseless enmity. Because in the face of what lurks in the darkness between the stars, we are all Earthlings. And we will either learn to act as a single, intelligent species, or we will simply be calibrated as a failed experiment. Therefore, this investigation is not just a story about aliens and conspiracies. It is a call to wake up, a call to grow up, a call to stop trusting the simple answers fed to us by those who wish to maintain their power and our ignorance, a call to start asking the right, uncomfortable questions, a call to develop critical thinking, to check sources, to learn to see patterns in the chaos of data, and most importantly, a call to keep looking up. Not with the naive wonder of a dreamer, but with the cold, watchful gaze of a sentinel on the wall. Because our watch has begun, and it will not end until we have answers, or until the stars go out. Keep watching, keep questioning, and never, ever trust the silence. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest scream of all.